Cue the Adam lore. This says live stream offline. Okay, now we're live. You are live. Hello, hello. Welcome to Rx Only Pictureshow. Episode number 57. Let's see, I don't have it yet. It says we're live. Oh, Snake Jones. Let's see. Do you see it on the, looks like, okay, there it is. See if I can pop the chat out. Pop out the chat. What's up, everybody? Snake Jones.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the In-N-Out Burger stuff?
Yeah, we can talk about the In-N-Out Burger stuff.
Yeah, so there's been a couple of news stories out about how those... How do you say her name? Is it Ghislaine or Ghislaine?
Ghislaine, I think.
Yeah.
I think so.
Those pictures of her at In-N-Out were photoshopped. And, they photoshopped a trash can out. Apparently that she had 2 orders, so someone else was eating with her. And, like, the ads in the background were photoshopped in to make the picture appear more recent.
Huh.
And also, the book she was reading, she has an Amazon review from 2015 of that book on Amazon.
She reviewed
and
the
I
book
think
herself?
It's gone now, but the post was archived. And she's talking about how like someone close to her had died, and how like it was important that you actually believe in something, and how it was a good thing that her friend died for either the CIA or Mossad. She's unclear. But it's like, oh, it was a reasonable sacrifice because her friend actually believed in something.
Wow.
That's what her review is. I can bring it up if I have it.
And that review is from a few years ago?
It was from 2015. And then she was out reading this book, and the book is about, it's like the life and death of CIA agents in the field.
Wow.
And that's what she's reading at In-N-Out with her dog. And apparently, like, her attorney or something is who provided those pictures to the New York Post in the first place. According to some article I read. But a weird thing is, the day after that, the New York Post had a story that was just someone left an In-N-Out burger on the ground in New York City.
They left an In-N-Out burger
untouched. Like, The New York Post story. Let me see if I can find it.
Welcome, new subscriber.
Yeah, this is the day after those Ghislaine Maxwell pictures came out. It says, mysterious untouched In-N-Out burger found lying on Queen Street. And they just have a picture of an In-N-Out burger. It's just double on it, and it's just, there's not a bite taken of it. And they have this whole news story on it. So someone was thinking, so they photoshopped out the trash can at the In-N-Out. And they think, I was reading some people think, is signaling a dead drop. So at this trash can, someone dropped something off. And then in and out, right? Come in and out. And then the next day, as to show successful receipt of the dead drop, someone posts an In-N-Out burger on the ground. A dead drop of an In-N-Out burger.
I wonder what the drop was.
I don't know. Who knows? Epstein stuff.
Epstein stuff.
And I was thinking, you know, blackmail and just leverage in general is a commodity. So, like, if let's say you have pictures of Donald Trump on what's embarrassing for Donald Trump?
I don't think much embarrasses Donald Trump.
If it's some compromising photo of anybody, you can sell it to somebody, right? It has value, and then they get what they get is leverage over the person you sold it to.
Yeah.
So like, there's now that Epstein's dead, he has all this material. I'm sure the police doesn't have all of it, and even if the police has it, they're gonna hold on to it or do something with it so that they can have leverage over people, right?
Yeah.
You can. It's kind of like the idea of like an FBI informant. You have leverage over them. You can kind of control them to some extent. They break crimes. They still break crimes. You even can help them break crimes. But they help you control the criminal community as you want. And that stuff is kind of, I imagine that stuff is all changing hands right now. It's kind of like a big storm. Big whirlpool.
I mean, the blackmail material is changing hands?
Yeah. I mean, it's a fact that, you know, that the Justice Department and like the NYPD got some of it, right? But like the stuff that they don't have, I'm sure is flying around. Because, as I said, that stuff has value. It can even be considered like an investment. I was reading about how like a bunch of scrolls at Qumran, at the Dead Sea Scroll stuff, like scholars never got to look at because a bunch of bankers and stuff went in the area and just bought them up because it was a sound investment. You know?
Yeah.
There's all sorts of stable investments that aren't like stocks or land. And one of them, I imagine, is high-level blackmail.
Yeah, blackmail's... they're the poker chips that the big guys use. Play their games.
Have little pictures on them.
Yeah, you might want to hold on to this one. It's your trump card. I'm just reading in the chat. Chris has said the audio is a little bit low, so I'm gonna. How's that, you guys? Audio correct, nice. So we've got a pretty exciting show today. S.B. is out of town; he's on vacation, so it's gonna be me and Harrison. Harrison has a pretty awesome, comprehensive timeline about aliens and the people that told us about aliens throughout time. I'm pretty excited. It's gonna be a good one. It's thorough too. You did some good work.
Thanks. You had before talked about wanting to do an alien show. S.B. wasn't super thrilled about the idea. Just going from his tone of voice, I don't know his thoughts. But and I thought, well, I want to do an alien show. So I social engineered my way in by asking you.
Yeah. Oops. And it was a good week to do it because, oops, what happened? It's a good week to do it this week because S.B.is out of town. So, yeah, I've had some UFO experiences. Oops.
You wanna open with that?
Yeah, the end here? Sure. And then we'll fade in here. What's up? Hello. Welcome to the show. You're on too, Harrison.
Hi.
Give him the wave.
Just popped up.
Yeah.
Are we beginning in earnest now?
We can. Yeah, I don't know. Any news? Anything interesting happening?
Beyond the In-N-Out burger, not entirely sure. I believe Denmark just threatened to buy the United States.
Oh wow. That's some news. I wonder what their offer was.
I don't know. I saw a comment that was like, I bet Wall Street would give them a loan.
I think they'd probably have to talk to China for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or somebody will give them a loan for it. What are they gonna do with it?
Otherwise, I'm not entirely sure on any news. We can kind of do some light UFO story time.
Sure.
If you'd like to begin.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I guess the very first time I saw something UFO-y, I was in high school, and I went to a movie with my buddy. And we were driving back home, and it was pretty late. It was like after midnight, and there were these. We were getting back to town. Like I lived near Mount Hood, and so like I could see the mountain in the background. I mean, it was at night. I knew where the mountain was, and I saw this green and red light, and they were like kind of flying around each other, like sort of like flies around an In-N-Out burger that somebody left on the sidewalk. And they were just kind of buzzing around, chasing each other, and they were moving over a huge area, and like it was like a way bigger space than an airplane would be able to do. And I was just like, hey, look at that. That's pretty weird. I got home and told my parents that I saw a UFO, and they were kind of like, hey. Sorry, my dog's barking. And they were like, huh, UFO, huh? Like, what were you doing before you saw the UFO? And I was like, then I kind of forgot about it for a long time because it was just pretty weird, and I didn't have any way to explain it. So I just kind of filed it away and forgot about it until later on in life when it kind of came up again. But it was pretty strange. It's pretty strange when you see stuff that aren't, that really aren't what, they don't really fit into the paradigm of what you should be seeing.
It's like the what the bleep do we know?
Yeah.
Ships sailing on the horizon and the Indians seeing them.
Yeah.
The prototypical what the bleep do we know?
Yeah, and they see like a log or something. Mm-hmm. They can't recognize it as a ship.
Right. I have a question about the lights you saw. Were they like keeping the same relative distance between each other, or are they just kind of like?
Yeah, they're kind of just like dancing together. Like one would chase the other one, and then they would switch, and the other one would chase that one. Sort of like figure eights, but like it was a little bit. It was like they'd figure eight a little bit, then they'd kind of spiral around a little bit. And it was just kind of weird, And one was green and one was red, which, I mean, you see red and green lights depending on what side of the airplane you're looking at, but they were staying the same color, and they were changing directions, going back and forth, so, and interacting with each other. It was pretty strange. But yeah, that was one of the first things I've seen. I've had a few other UFO experiences. One time I was visiting a friend in Bend, Oregon, and we were talking about UFOs, and so we went outside, and he was in a band, so he was gonna go play a show that night. So we went outside, and he was gonna like smoke a cigarette and get ready to leave, and I was just like kind of bebopping and looking up at the sky, and I saw this like it was like a boomerang shaped thing in the sky. It was like black and it had like red flashing lights underneath of it, and I was like, "Hey, look!" And I pointed up to it, and he looks up at it, and as soon as I pointed and he looked up, it went all shimmery, like it wasn't black anymore. It looked like the alien from Predator. You know when he had that like that invisibility armor.
The active camouflage.
Yeah, it like went all shimmery, but you could still see the outline of it, and it like turned like its whole underside to point at us, like I was imagining it like it took a picture of us or something, and then it like tipped all the way up onto its side and made this like flipped around and went almost backwards. It like did the zig and then turned again and flipped that way, like went zig zag zig and shot off in the horizon. It was bizarre. We were both like, "Whoa, what was that?" And it kind of felt like some sort of a government drone or something, because I mean, I don't know, it's kind of the feeling I got. And later on, a couple years later, there was a drone that got shot down during Obama's, in the White House during Obama's time. And there was a drone that got shot down, I think in China or the Middle East. I'd have to go back and look, but it was like a secret drone, and there were some drawings of it or photographs of it in the newspaper, and it looked just like that, pretty much.
I think I've seen it. It kind of looks a little bit like a stealth fighter.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I don't know, it just kind of, the way that it moved, it was, I don't think a human being could withstand the G-forces of the turns it made, because it like almost went, it went over, like not quite 180 degrees. It like made like a 130 degree turn, like backwards. Well, no, wait, not 360. It made like a 300 degree turn, like the other direction. It was just bizarre.
Right.
It was crazy. But yeah, how about you? If you had any UFO experiences?
So yeah, my mom and my grandma, like many years ago, were like in their yard, and they looked up and they saw like one of the cigar-shaped crafts with lights on the side, and then it just kind of like zipped off after a moment.
Wow.
But I have seen things that are kind of ambiguous, like they could be really strange flying formations at night of airplanes, so I just kind of dismiss it. Like it could be one thing, it could be another. Just like lights kind of like doing this.
Yeah.
And then they meet and then immediately do that.
And converge and go off?
Yeah, but like right next to each other, and like their blinking lights are perfectly out of phase with each other.
Oh, crazy.
Like one goes off. But like that could be... And like the next day I saw a bunch of like fighter jets flying around the city I was in. So like,
Yeah.
It could be a military exercise. But I have had a close encounter.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I was staying at a friend's house. It was like in middle school. We were just like staying the night at his house, and we were waiting for his brother to come. And he was supposed to come like midnight, 1 a.m, something like that. We're waiting for him to come. And we're just hanging out in his room. And his room faced the back of his house, but that's where his driveway was. Like his driveway went around to the back.
Yeah.
And so if you saw lights coming in, it would be someone coming on and parking. It wouldn't be street traffic. So around 3:00, which is you see like this blue light just pouring in through the window, and we were like, I guess your brother's home. And like we wait and like we're listening for doors or something or some kind of sound, and we don't hear anything. And we just don't really think about it. And then like an hour later, we're just talking, and like he had 2 different beds. So I'm like on one side of the room, he's on the other side of the room. We're just like hanging out. we hear the doorknob start turning, and we look over, and the door opens, and there's just like kind of like a gray, like featureless looking face, kind of like pretty short. Like you'd have to be hunkered over pretty far to be that low. Just like, but it's heading through the door.
Wow.
And we just both turned our head and looked, and then it just closed the door, and like we just kept staring for like 2 or 3 minutes, and we didn't say anything.
Yeah.
Like we talked, and we're like, "What the hell?" It was like, "Is that your mom? Is that your brother? Like what was that?" And we did not go to sleep. And like we were at 2 different angles, so we got different views on it. And so the next day, like around noon, his brother comes in. He like spent the night somewhere with his girlfriend. And so it wasn't him. And we asked his parents, like, "Hey, did you come upstairs last night?" They're like, "No." So we were pretty struck by that, pretty shaken. Now his brother divulged much later, and my friend hadn't told his brother this, but about the incident. But his brother said that same morning, because he came in with his girlfriend. It was like the first time he brought his girlfriend home, so it was like a memorable thing. He said that next day he was sitting on the couch with his girlfriend, and there's a different door, but the doorknob to the outside started jiggling, and there's just no one on the other side.
Wow.
He like opened the door and looked around. There's like nobody there.
Wow.
Pretty spooky story.
That is totally spooky. Totally spooky.
And I always had like a really bad fear of like aliens when I was a kid, because I'd read a bunch of like Forteana books at school, because they had that in the school library. I'd read about like alien abductions and like the Montauk Project and.
Oh yeah. What's the Montauk Project again? It's
That was like in New York. It's what Stranger Things is based on. It's like it kind of ties into MK Ultra, and I think there was like some like sodomy rituals going on, and they're like opening portals to other dimensions, and like it all goes crazy at like in this one story where like they summon Bigfoot and he just like trashes the installation. So it's real. It's real fringy.
Yeah.
But I was reading about that stuff when I was like in 4th grade, so I was like super paranoid about it all the time. And then I kind of like wasn't, and then that event happened. So I don't know. That was always kind of like something that was on my mind all the time, was like aliens, and that's kind of what I grew up in the 90s. Like that was a prevailing pop culture thing, like with the X-Files and all that.
Oh yeah.
And so and a lot of us had beliefs, or still now have beliefs, about different conceptions of aliens, or like different motifs or themes, like with abductions, or like what the aliens look like. It's like a mythology or a lore, and you have to wonder, where does that stuff come from? Who said this when? Like what sorts of things influenced those depictions? Because it wasn't a vacuum. It wasn't just like some guy in a certain alien or UFO encounter like invented the story whole cloth. And I'm saying that he it's often the case that they're influenced by something else. And so we have a conception of aliens that's painted by all these specific events, and because of that, it changes the way we think of the world. So in a sense, it's kind of like when people talk about flat Earth or globe Earth, it's like how do you conceive of the world, and people can have different emotional reactions to just how they think of the place they live in, right?
Oh yeah.
So in a way, manipulating what people think about aliens or the possibility of aliens will have them recategorize the world they're living in and their role in it, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
that's something like with Reagan's speech to the UN, when he talks about, oh, wouldn't it be great if we were met by an outside alien force, then the whole world would unite, like that whole.
Yeah, the New World Order speech,
Mm-hmm.
I guess.
And it's just communicating those ideas is a way to change people slightly towards the worldview that you're selling,
Oh yeah, definitely. Just little mentions of it on, and like in a presidential speech, that's the whole world has taken that in, and if they just kind of ignore it, it's being filed away in the what could possibly be section of their brain.
And we've been it's been such a gradual rollout that by the time since late 2017, when the news has been like, hey, the Navy had these encounters with UFOs, the Navy is now going to be explicitly recording UFO events. People are like, whatever, I don't care. Like, it wasn't news at that point, It's half they'd been so exposed to it and had habituated to it that it wasn't like a sudden revelation, and the other half was people can't really trust the news. That was after the sort of the fake news meme had already blown up by late 2017. So people didn't know to trust it, because if they believed in aliens, they probably weren't already trusting the government to begin with, or for other reasons they wouldn't trust the government.
Yeah.
So I prepared this slideshow in this presentation. As I was making it, I was not too sure what I was even doing. I was talking to a friend as I was making it, like, I don't know what the thesis of this is, but I'm just stringing it all together. And then after I had made it and I looked at it, I was like, I've made a presentation on aliens and people who've told us about aliens. They're the gatekeepers. They're the dudes in They Live, right? At the end of They Live, they have that party and the radio and the TV.
Yeah. With the
headquarters.
The Texan guy.
They're like whining and dining all the humans who've like submitted to them and are like good slaves to them.
Yeah.
It's like they're the go-betweens between the so-called aliens and us.
Yeah.
So what are those people saying? And it's also about influences and motifs and how they actually wind up coming to fruition in abduction reports and stuff like that. So I spent quite a bit of time. I don't know if it comes through, but I hope we have an interesting take we can take away from this presentation about how we think about what aliens are. And I'm not really concerned if they're real or not, or whether they're a psyop or not, because as far as this thesis is concerned, it's kind of immaterial. We're just going to zetetically look at what people are saying and just see how it fits into the picture. So some things the establishment will say, that didn't happen, or others will say, this happened. I'm like, well, I'm not sure that actually happened. So whether or not things happened isn't entirely important. The fact that someone said it and it sort of resonated and it's remembered and influenced things is what's important. All right. I guess if we can click over to the presentation.
Yeah, would you like the first slide over here?
Okay, is it up? I'm a little behind on the YouTube.
Yeah, I'll put the slide up right now here.
Okay.
There it is.
So here's my very long-winded title, and I have a picture of a magician summoning a little gray alien, just for a little taste of what's to come. Okay. So starting off, we're going to look into the classical to ancient era, ancient past, as looking at the stars themselves as celestial beings, as gods, or as angels. So first, I'm going to focus on what the Standard Bible says as far as the angel-star correlation is concerned. So in Job, we have the account where God's talking to Job and being like, were you there at the creation of the universe, essentially? And so where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for glory. So just having sons of God, which are the B'nai Elohim. This is the same phrase that appears in Genesis 6 with the sons of God coming down and mating with human women, which would be equivalent to the Watchers. That's in Job and in Genesis is the only place this appears in the Bible, B'nai Elohim. But you can see in that sentence they're being equated to celestial beings in the sense of the morning stars. So when the morning stars sing together and all the sons of God shouted for glory. So it's kind of like all these celestial beings existed and then the earth was made in front of them. So in that sense, these lowercase g gods or angels are being compared to stars. And then Psalm 147:4, he counts the number of stars and he calls them all by name. So I believe earlier in that psalm it talks about how God counts every grain of sand or numbers them, and then here it says he calls stars by name, so each star has a name. And then now we're going to move over to star angel equivalents in Enoch. So there's quite a bit of it. I don't have all of it here, just what I could find and what was most germane to the discussion. So this is showing how this is a part where Enoch, I believe he's riding on a cloud with angels, which you could take to be a UFO, I suppose, if you wanted to. And he's looking at the area around the pillars that hold up heaven and earth. And he says, I saw the winds of heaven which turn and bring the circumference of the sun and all the stars to their setting. So he's basically seeing the path of the stars. I saw the winds on the earth carrying the clouds. I saw the paths of the angels. So it's sort of equivocating, the right word?
I think so.
Making equivocating the motion of the stars with the motion of the angels. This second verse I have here, I kind of call it the Project Bluebeam verse from Enoch, talking about how sort of in the end times that stars, it says, many chiefs of the stars shall transgress their prescribed order. They come down to the earth. The whole order of the stars shall be conceived from the sinners. So that means they can't be seen in the sky. The thoughts of those on earth shall err concerning them. They get confused of what they are. They should be altered from all their ways. The men of the earth shall err and take them to be God. Shall take the stars that were in the sky to be gods, and in this case being angels, talking about fallen angels. And it says punishment shall come upon them. And then there's some more equivalents in Revelation of John, where it's talking about the dragon taking a third of the stars from the sky, meaning the host of heaven, specifying angels falling. And then so Satan fails in his rebellion, or the dragon fails in his rebellion. He does not win, and they are no longer in heaven. The stars are no longer in heaven. The fallen angels are no longer in heaven. And then as well, this will kind of crop up later. Many people make equivalencies between the UFO phenomenon and the vision of Ezekiel, specifically things like the living creatures seen in Ezekiel. So that would be the cherubim and the seraphim, and the ophanim, which are the wheels and wheels. And sometimes they're depicted as the wheels on the Merkaba, which means like vehicle, which I guess is like the moving vehicle of the throne of God, is what the ophanim are depicted as. And so I don't think it's in my presentation, but I believe like later the founder of the Nation of Islam, I cannot remember his name, said that Japan had an Ezekiel wheel in their armament and they could destroy the United States at any moment. And then like the US Army actually investigated the founder of the Nation of Islam, thinking he was a Japanese asset for saying that.
Wow.
All right, so we're going to go back before that, go back to Sumer. So in the Sumerian religion, whenever they would write the names of a god, they'd actually write this little symbol I have at the bottom. A symbol they call it Dinger, which means god, and it's related to Tengri of Tengriism, which is like what the Mongols worship, Tengri, the blue sky.
It looks like a cross. Or
yeah,
like
it's an 8-pointed star cross thing. So it's they call it a logogram because it's a star, right? So it means it's a picture of a star and it means something like star, but it's called Dinger. The actual lexical meaning of that as a word is An or Anu, which means heaven, which was the Sumerian god of gods or father of all the gods. And like the word Anunnaki means offspring of Anu, literally, and you can compare that to the earlier take of sons of God from Job and Genesis being the watchers or the angels who came down to earth. And that's all tied into that little symbol that they'd mark before the name of a god, kind of like an asterisk, like a modern asterisk, which means star, of course. but just kind of like a little signifier of their divinity. And so I say, by this convention, Sumerian gods were likened to stars in the night sky, because somewhat like Uranus was heaven, so Anu was also heaven, and that's the night sky, right?
Yeah.
Just a little bit more elaboration. So there's a lot of like conflicting accounts of like poems and legends and myth in Sumeria and Babylon and Akkadians. But one story they have is with the Igigi, which means something like the watchers who deflower. It's the word I and the word for fornicate stuck together. So
the word I as in me?
Eyeball.
Oh, eyeball.
Eyeball and fornicate.
Huh.
So some gloss it as the watchers who deflower, like things who look and fornicate, which would describe the watchers of the Enoch story.
Yeah, they looked and they touched.
They do. And another story has them. It says that they're the gods of heaven, and the Anunnaki are the gods of the underworld. And then also in most myths, the Anunnaki are seven. There's seven of them. Whether they're in the underworld or not, they seem to correlate with the seven luminaries. So sort of like with later like Greek pantheons or other pantheons, you sort of have equivalence between those gods and the planets to some degree. Not every god is a planet, of course.
Yeah.
But with the Anunnaki, I believe that's what's actually being specified, because like there's like a relation between Venus and Inanna that was explicit in these myths, and I'm not sure about the equivalence between the other gods and the planets, but I'm sure that someone thought that at the time. Just a further elaboration on this, I like to cite this work a lot. It's called On the Mysteries of the Egyptians by the Neoplatonic author Iamblichus. I think this was written in like 400 AD. But it's apparently the way it's written is supposedly like communications between the author Iamblichus and this ancient Egyptian priest who's like communicating the mysteries, the theology of the mysteries to Iamblichus. So these are quotes. The quotes I'm reading are going to be from this Egyptian priest. What they're talking about is, how do we think about gods with bodies versus gods without bodies? And you might say, huh? What they're talking about there is gods that have a body being a star, and then all the spiritual, supernatural entities that don't have their body as a star. And I'll read you some of these quotes. So, are gods separated from demons by the distinctions of bodied and unbodied, saying are gods the ones that have bodies and demons the ones that don't have bodies? If only the gods are incorporeal, how shall the sun, the moon, and the luminaries visible in the sky be accounted as gods? The body of the divine guardian of the star, which kind of reminds me of remember in Enoch it's talked about the chieftains of the stars, right? The powers of the stars. The body of the divine guardian of the star in the sky is very closely akin to the incorporeal essence of the gods. So the body it has a nature similar to the incorporeal nature of the god that it is the body of. On the contrary, the living forms of the gods in the sky are in every respect similar and united, and are likewise complete, uniform, and uncompounded through their entire substance. Basically what I just said. Therefore, the gods that are visible in the sky are likewise, all of them, in a certain sense, incorporeal. So even though they have a body, their consciousness, their intelligence, it does not come from matter. That's what it's saying. And then the translation notes I had of this document, it has this quote in this section, which I find really interesting. So this is from Origen, who's a Christian writer, and not Neoplatonic, says, Origen affirmed that the angels have bodies and that God alone is spiritual essence without body. Hence the clause in the Confession, without body, parts, or passion, saying that angels also have bodies. Now, I believe if you go pretty deep in the Christian theology, the angels have bodies of empyrean fire, which is something like quintessence or ether. As well, I had an article emailed to me out of nowhere, like some website content aggregator just was like, you like to read articles, I'll send this to you. About Sirius, the star Sirius. I was like, all right. So here's two quotes. So Eratosthenes, in his work Astrothesii, or Katasterismoi, writes about the dog, being Canis, the constellation, which he calls both Isis and Sirius, describing it as great and bright. Plutarch, in his Opus De Isidae et Osiridae, writes that Isis, which he identifies with Athena, is Sirius, the well-known star of the dog. And I couldn't find all the sources for this, but many occultists and ancient philosophers considered that Isis and the star Sirius were somehow the same thing.
Yeah, that's cool. I used to call her Candy Wife.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the name me and my friends came up with for her because she was so bright. I didn't know that it was Sirius or Isis, but she's so bright, and then she kind of flashes between white and red and blue like a barbershop pole.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you know what? In that paper I was reading, all the ancient authors say that Sirius is red.
Really?
But now people say that Sirius is generally blue.
Huh.
So if you go really deep into some occult thought, there's like the idea of like Sirius goes far away and then comes closer, and that actually causes the cycles of the gold, silver, bronze, and iron ages. So like the distance of Sirius and the proximity is what vacillates between like the golden age and like the Kali Yuga, basically.
Well, I guess that there's supposed to be color shifts, frequencies depending on how close or how far away something is. It could.
Yeah, the Doppler effect. I forgot to say that, so thank you for saying that. What I said almost made no sense without that. Yeah, so like if light's coming at you, it looks more blue, and if it's going away, it looks more red.
Yeah. Yeah, like a police car, when you see them long ways off, you can always see the blue lights more than the red lights, and when they're really close, you can see the red lights just because.
Also, the siren changes in pitch, right?
Yeah.
That's the same.
Yeah.
Like the wave nature is the same as the light for that. The pitch changing.
Very cool stuff.
What I have here is a Vimana. I think this one's from the Ramayana. So in Hinduism, Vimanas are flying vehicles. They're often like flying mansions. I bring them up because people compare modern UFOs to Vimanas. I think some ancient writings on them say that they were powered by Mercury. And then some people who are like whistleblowers about UFOs will say that UFOs are powered by Mercury or magnetic Mercury. Some people say red Mercury, which is an old like alchemical idea that Mercury can be like charged and becomes red Mercury, and it's able to transmute at that point.
And so, supposedly, there's some folklore that Singer sewing machines, those old-fashioned sewing machines, that they would contain a little tiny bit of red mercury in the needle, I guess. And supposedly they were like countries or terrorist groups were like buying all the old Singer sewing machines so that they could extract the red mercury and use it to make some sort of a super weapon.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Supposedly it's been debunked as just folklore, but the
it
usual
almost sounds
suspects.
like the premise to a Vonnegut book or something.
Yeah, definitely sounds like a Vonnegut.
So this is the Merkaba with the Phantom wheels. I was just showing it put it in the presentation to show you how similar it looks to this depiction of a Vimana. And then so Brahmastras, they have a much longer name I cannot remember, but Brahmastra works. These are ancient Vedic weapons, or Hindu or Aryan weapons, however you want to call it, in the Vedic scriptures. I guess in this case the Mahabharata is later than the Vedic era, but whatever. These are weapons that cause huge explosions. And I'll read you this little passage from the Mahabharata. So it says, it blazes up with terrible flames with a huge sphere of fire. Numerous peals of thunder were heard, thousands of meteors fell, and all living creatures became terrified with great dread. The entire sky seemed to be filled with noise and assumed a terrible aspect with flames of fire. The whole earth with her mountains and waters and trees trembled. When it strikes an area, it will cause complete destruction and nothing will ever grow, not even a blade of grass for the next 12 years. It will not rain for 12 years in that area, and everything, including metal and earth, becomes poisoned. Which sounds like what a nuke is supposed to be like. It's a big explosion, and then residual radiation in the area poisons people.
Yeah.
Right? That sounds quite a bit like a nuke, and just this idea actually helped inform the people working on the nuke in the Manhattan Project. They had this idea in mind when they were making it.
Old Oppenheimer.
So when we talk about aliens, it's often mixed in with supernatural encounters. So often there'll be like poltergeist activity at the same time. Or it's sort of like fulfilling old tropes about mischievous spirits. So like with fairies and demons. So in medieval folklore, in some cases they'll say fairies, in some cases they'll say demons. They're roughly made equivalent and switched out in the traditions. But so for one instance that's similar to modern UFO lore or like abduction reports are changelings. So changelings are the idea that like when a woman has a baby, fairies will come in the night, take the baby and replace it with like a different thing. So
yeah, that happened to Angelina Jolie one time in a movie called Changeling.
Is it after the twisting? Or is it before?
I think it's before the twisting.
Okay.
You never can be sure though.
Okay. So like on Wikipedia it'll say like, oh, this is an explanation for like like developmentally disabled children or like kids with Down syndrome. Like, oh, this is what went wrong with my baby. Fairies took it. But it's somewhat similar to accounts of people being abducted and having like their genitals and their germline cells tampered with, and like the alien human hybrid stuff kind of plays into that. And then there's the incubus succubus angle, which is like a night terror, sleep paralysis, nighttime sexual union with a spirit. And that's pretty similar to some later UFO stuff where people are, as I just said, taken aboard. Sometimes they'll like they're forced that or like hypnotically coerced to have sex with an alien to make like a alien human hybrid.
Yeah.
But some people say that the aliens are hermaphrodites. It's not super consistent, of course. There's also the idea of abductions or spiriting away people. It's like fairies were said to spirit people away, so they'd like just like teleport them somewhere essentially, or take them in a certain like a realm. So it'd be kind of like a mirror world where like everything's the same, but there's not like people around, and then like the fairies go away and people come back. And there's the idea of like the fairy lands, the fairy islands, like Tir na Nog, which is the island of eternal youth, and Avalon. So Tir na Nog would be Irish, Avalon is British. I believe Avalon's Arthurian. It's the place of the fairies, and there's similar ideas in other mythical fairy systems. And this is a cool picture. Oh, did you have something to say?
No, I guess I was just saying Avalon was like from the Arthurian legends. Is that what you said?
I believe so.
Yeah, and that was the fairyland.
I think it's like where Morgan Le Fay's from.
Oh yeah.
Just kind of, I might be wrong on that, but that's what's in my head. So I've actually, this is a picture by Michelangelo, and I actually have seen this with my eyes. It's pretty small, but it's a cool painting. But this is just kind of showing these demons tormenting St. Anthony, but they've taken him up into the sky. So technically what happened in the story is St. Anthony is taken up in the sky by angels, and then the demons take custody of him or shoo the angels away, and then they're attacking him in the sky. But this is a pretty interesting picture to think about in relation to the alien phenomenon.
Huh.
Plus I like the fish demon with the little snout. He's cute.
It looks like a nice one.
Yeah. And then so there's these like weird anomalous paintings from the Renaissance era of like aliens. In this case, I don't really think this is supposed to be an alien. I think this is more like stars as intelligences. But I mean, it's whatever. Doesn't matter what I think. But
looks like something's going on. Somebody's flying that
yeah,
that planetary body.
Right. So it kind of looks like the sun and the moon. Now, the one on the right, it's got this 8-pointed star, which is often the star of Ishtar, right?
Yeah.
So maybe it's like the morning star of Venus or something. Not quite sure, but you have definitely intelligences driving stars. Oh, and one thing I forgot to mention is I believe Aristotle, when he's talking about the prime mover and the unmoved mover, is so you may be familiar with these terms from like a theological discussion, but it basically is the idea of a spiritual force or metaphysical force that's able to influence nature, just metaphysically. So like the idea of like the theistic idea of God creating the universe would be as the prime mover, the first mover. Now that's a type of unmoved mover, and Aristotle said he considered the luminaries each to have an intelligence that governed them that was an unmoved mover and caused them to move. So a lot of the ideas of each planet, say being an archon or being a god or being an intelligence, is somewhat informed by this idea in part, where Aristotle says each planet has an intelligence behind it that is an unmoved mover, but he considered each unmoved mover in the universe to be created by the original prime mover. All right, sorry for that aside.
That was a good one.
So next we have some pretty interesting pictures. The one on the left is kind of a common depiction of like the hand of God causing a miracle on the earth. You can just kind of see like a cloud, a saucer-shaped thing shooting a beam into the head of this woman. It looks like angels are also approaching her. So in a sense, it's not exactly an angel that's causing it, because there's just an angel in the picture. They could have just shown an angel doing it, right?
Yeah, perhaps it's the vehicle for the messengers of God.
Perhaps. And yeah, there are chariots of fire, of course, in the Bible I did not talk about, which would sort of give you the impression of a moving star. As well, I learned that the word disaster means something like fallen star. The aster meaning star, dis kind of means like ill-fated.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Yeah.
Don't diss the stars.
And then on the right, that's a pretty interesting picture. It kind of reminds me, I believe there's a UFO account by Alexander where he says like he saw a shield swooping under the clouds.
Oh, yeah.
And that kind of looks like a shield with the little rivet-looking thing in the middle, or like spike.
Yeah, I think I remember that. Something about shields following him through some of his last battles.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of interesting.
And a commonly reported, or an event of that era in Nuremberg, Germany, was this event that happened in 1561, where I believe it happened kind of early in the morning, but people saw this great sort of turning in motion in the sky, where they had these like tubes with like glowing orbs coming out of them, and they were like battling in the sky. And this is a really nice colored woodcut. The newspaper, they had colored woodcuts in 1561 in their newspapers.
That's awesome.
It's crazy. So swank. Look at the detail on the houses in the countryside.
Oh yeah. It kind of reminded me of the cigar-shaped UFO.
Mm-hmm. Very much, and those are often like spoken of as motherships, right?
Yeah.
And here's another rendition of the same event. They don't have the cylindrical-looking objects, but they have the different spheres fighting in the sky.
That's just craziness. Makes you wonder if something like that's going on all the time, and just in another sort of dimension, and we can't see it, or if it was something special was happening. You know,
interesting
at that moment that made it. You know, there was somebody did a ritual behind closed doors, and it brought up.
The doors of perception were opened.
The doors of perception were opened.
All right, so I'm going to kind of go back to the Roman Empire real fast. We're going to start talking about aliens in fiction. And this paper was also emailed to me randomly by like a non-human, but that's okay. So this guy, Lucian of Samosata, wrote this book called A True Story, and he's kind of making fun of like literary epics and classical literature. And he's like, in the foreword, he's like, I will be the most truthful storyteller and tell you up front that I am lying. That's kind of the vibe of the story. It's pretty funny. But in the story, he like gets a ship of people, and they actually sail beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Okay, they sail beyond the Pillar of Hercules into the
Plus Ultra.
exactly into the Atlantic Ocean, and he gets into a water spout whirlpool thing. He gets taken up to the moon.
Wow.
Goes to the moon. Yeah, this is 120 AD. They go to the moon, and there's the king of the moon. He's got all of his guys. There's a king of the sun, and they are at war, right? And they're warring over the territory of the Morning Star. So he like participates in the war, and then afterwards he goes to Sirius, and there's dog-headed people in Sirius called the Sino-Balani. So in that story, he goes past the Pillars of Hercules. Now there's a very similar story that's lost to us. We just have comments on it. It's called Of the Wonderful Things Beyond Thule by Antonius Diogenes, features a journey to the moon. So in one story, they're going beyond the Pillars of Hercules, and this one they're going beyond Thule or Thule, right?
Is that the same as the Thule Society from...
It would be the same Thule. So in
Thule?
Greek mythology, Thule was right before you get to the North Pole, which would be Rubes Niger, right? I mean, the North Pole being that. So Thule is the island right before you get to the northernmost region of the Earth. So that also sort of ties into the plus ultra theme of go beyond you go to the planets, right?
Oh, yeah.
The civilizations of the planet. So that's quite interesting. And some robot emailed that to me like 3 days ago.
That was helpful. Thanks, robot.
Yeah.
That robot was nobody's Thule.
I think there's a meteor hit, a U.S. base, a meteor hit pretty recently, and it's called, I think it's Ultima Thule, or Ultima Thule might be a asteroid they just named, and then it's like maybe it's like furthest Thule or like Thule base, the meteor hit the U.S. base in like Finland, I think. That's interesting that the name keeps cropping up.
Ultima Thule, that's interesting.
Yeah. So we'll be talking quite a bit about Theosophy in this discussion. So first I want to lay the groundwork of what Theosophy was before Blavatsky got involved. So the term Theosophia was used quite a bit in the classical era of like early church fathers. It just meant theology essentially. And then in the Renaissance, it sort of got a different flavor to it. So there's these different movements kind of coalesce together. So there's different Gnostic traditions in like Bulgaria and France and Egypt. And then there's Christian mysticism like the Rosicrucians and some Paracelsus's alchemy. So he was like German alchemist in the 1500s. He came up with the elemental spirits and all sorts of stuff. So all these things sort of converged together, and they created a movement where they're concerned with secret knowledge, as is pretty common with mysticism, and then spiritual intermediaries. So the early Theosophists, these authors, describe themselves as heirs to alchemy, astrology, Hermeticism, Kabbalah, and Rosicrucianism. So they're saying, this is what we represent, this is where we've come from, these are where our ideas are from, and generally that checks out. So that's all I'm saying. And there's this one figure who's pretty influential. His name's Karl von Eckarthausen. He was a Catholic mystic, and he was a member of the Bavarian Illuminati. But it should be noted, he left the Bavarian Illuminati after he realized they were essentially materialists. So he didn't stick around in the Illuminati for long. He wrote a book called Cloud Upon the Sanctuary, and this was a book that the Golden Dawn particularly liked. This is something they recommended their initiates read, and Aleister Crowley, I believe, he actually joined the Golden Dawn to read this document.
Wow.
So in the work, it talks about a council of light that was made up of dead mystics who remained active on Earth, and he claimed to be in communication with the council of light.
Did you find any copies of the document, Cloud Upon Sanctuary?
I didn't read it, but here's some publication covers I put up. They're pretty Rosicrucian-y looking, if you ask me.
Oh, those are cool.
I didn't attempt to read it. There's so much stuff I had to pour over. I just, had to.
Looks sort of a Tree of Life-ish.
Yeah. Oh, you know what you can notice in what looks like is apparently describing the Trinity? You have an upside down triangle, a right side up triangle, and then at the top they are converging to make a hexagram.
That looks like Aleister Crowley's symbol. Of the overlapping the three or.
Oh, the unicursal hexagram.
Yeah, with the circles.
A little bit.
Interesting.
So beyond that, those early theosophists and those ancient writers, the earliest thing I could find talking about people living on other planets was Mormonism. And the Book of Abraham came out in 1842. So there's this old Egyptian, I don't know what you call it, stele or rock, I guess, with inscriptions on it.
Yeah.
And Egyptologists were like, I don't know what this is. I don't know what this says. And Joseph Smith was like, I know what it says. And he translated it, allegedly. And it was the Book of Abraham. And it started talking about all these planets. And it talks about the Mormon cosmology. There's all these planets. And Mormon, I can say cosmology again. If you're a true believing Mormon, you go to the third heaven when you die. And that is where you are the lord of your own planet, and then you sort of like have your own Jesus baby, you have all spirit children, and you start the cycle over again. The implication being Elohim, God the Father, was he himself once a man who became a god. Anyway, so in the Mormon idea, there's all these planets with people living on them, and that comes from this alleged translation of this Egyptian artifact. Now, they have since translated this artifact, and it's not the Book of Abraham.
Oh.
Just throwing it out there.
It's kind of a letdown.
Here's just a light overview. I'm not going to go over it too well of the Mormon cosmology if you want to pause and read all this stuff. It's derived from the Book of Abraham. There's like the celestial, which is supposed to be where God lives, and then Kolob's the closest planet to the celestial. I believe in Battlestar Galactica, both series, same creator, was Mormon, and he actually seeded the story with all sorts of Mormon allusions. So there's a planet Kobal, so of Kolob, in Battlestar Galactica, where that's the true ancestral homeland of all humans. Home planet. That's pretty interesting. That he had his Mormonism would inform his science fiction so much, right? Because it's transferable.
I wonder if they eat a lot of shish kebabs on planet Kolob.
I'm not sure if they just eat manna from a vending machine,
Vending machine manna is pretty good.
Maybe it's like Dippin' Dots. I always imagined manna looked kind of like Dippin' Dots.
You're probably right.
So the next, formally the author, the big author that popularized aliens and space travel was Jules Verne. He had early works. I think this was Journey to the Center of the Earth, like his fourth book, and he was pretty prolific. That was in 1864. I have that on here because we're going to be going to the center of the Earth pretty soon here. Like, what does that have to do with aliens? A lot, I guess. Then the next year, he wrote From the Earth to the Moon, which would later be adapted to a movie, silent movie, and then Around the Moon, which is the sequel to From the Earth to the Moon. Now, I kind of want to talk about the shift in thinking about the moon, because even though the classical authors wrote about going to the moon and landing on it, not everybody thought, in all of history, thought about the moon as a surface you could land on, right? It was a light in the sky. It wasn't necessarily a sphere in the sky that had its own gravity and sediment. So this is making firm that idea that the moon is a physical object you can go to, you can land on it, you could possibly live there, you could go around it, around the moon.
Wow.
That seeds those ideas.
Yeah,
And those
very much like
early
the
science fiction
Apollo.
books.
The Apollo
Huh?
mission. The Apollo missions came straight out of Jules Verne. It sounds like.
Exactly, and a lot of the people who would develop submarine or rockets would credit those books as inspiring those ideas, as making them a reality. So this is a very important book right here. This is called The Coming Race. Sometimes it's called Vril, The Coming Race, by Edward Bulwer Lytton, 1871. So a lot of theosophists would claim that what this book said was true, that it was channeled or like received knowledge, and certain figures in the Nazi Party were into this book. So basically what this story purports is there's like a cave explorer, I think he's a miner or something. He like finds this tunnel and he goes in and it's the hollow earth. And he goes inside the earth and he sees this huge civilization. And it's this ancient civilization. Let me look at my notes. I don't have it on my notes. That's okay. It's an ancient civilization. They're apparently survivors of the Great Flood. They go and they continue the antediluvian society underground. They go underground and they have this technology called Vril, which is roughly equivalent. I'd say it's essentially the same thing as the ether, quintessence, the materia prima. It's basically like the force behind the four elements, like what the four elements you could almost think of as being made of, or like what stars or what higher level beings are made of, or like the predecessor to the four fundamental forces, that sort of idea that powers all their technology. So it's like the pure universal energy. And so all these theosophists were claiming that it was a channeled book because it agreed with what they were saying. We'll see what they're saying in a bit. Do you have any questions about this?
No, I don't think so. I'd like to read it sometime. It sounds pretty interesting.
It's just copyrighted material right at the top, so you're gonna have to buy it. Now, I'm pretty sure it's what do you call it? Public domain by now.
Yeah.
Sold. But like, you'll see Vril pop up a lot in this presentation as well, like the Die Glocke, German UFOs were sometimes called Vril. There's like supposedly reptilian aliens are called Vril, stuff like that. So it comes up quite a bit. So now we're going to move into the Blavatskyan era of Theosophy. So the Theosophical Society was founded in 1875. That's 4 years after the Vril book, by Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, Henry Alcott, and William Gwan Judge. My take on Theosophy. So the earlier form of Theosophy was kind of all about reconciling like Christian and Near Eastern mysticism, kind of putting it together. Whereas this Blavatskyan was more about taking what they had just made and reconciling that with Far Eastern esotericism, so things like Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, that sort of stuff was being looked at and worked through and synthesized in a way that practitioners of those traditions weren't super fond of. Notable members will include Annie Besant, the Catholic priest Charles Ledbetter, and Alice Bailey later on. So Mahatmas, or this sort of idea, comes up a lot in Theosophy. It's derived from, what was his name? Eric Vaughan. I can't remember his name. He wrote
Daniken?
The Cloud Upon the Sanctuary we just talked about. He talked about the Council of Light, the German guy. So in Blavatsky's writings, she was a practitioner of spirit mediumship. So she claimed to channel all these entities, and they were said to be Mahatmas. Now, Mahatma is Sanskrit. It means great soul. So people say Mahatma Gandhi. It's just kind of like a designator of like elevation. She also calls them adepts, masters of wisdom, master of compassion, masters of the hidden brotherhood, elder brothers, etc. And they're spiritual beings, and some of them had names. I don't really know how to pronounce this. Dwal Kul, Kuhumi, and Moria. Those three dudes were said to be ancient Tibetan mystics, and they sort of like ascended upon death to be these spiritual planetary guardians.
Visual cool. He sounds pretty cool.
I don't know. I don't remember if I have a picture of him. He's a rather stoic looking fella from the rendition of him.
Sounds like he'd be smoking cigarettes on a billboard in the 1950s or 60s, you know?
But, I mean, I think it would have worked out pretty well in the 60s.
Or
Like Aquarius
hey,
brand
yeah,
cigs.
clove cigarettes maybe.
Yeah.
That'd be pretty cool.
This is going to come up a bit more too, is the seven rays as interpreted by the Theosophists. So in many ancient religions and mystical schools, you see like this seven crop up a lot, like seven spheres, seven domains, seven planets. They sort of all correlate together as like frequencies or like realms you can tap into or go to, like leave your body and go up to the night sky and
Yeah.
that sort of thing. So this researcher linked the seven rays as a term to seven luminaries in Babylonian, Jewish, Persian, Syrian, Phoenician, and Egyptian traditions. It's a little later than where we're at now, but in the 1870s, the seven rays referred to these primeval forces, and Blavatsky specifically said they were equated to the lower seven Sephirot, and said each ray could be called a celestial being, could be called a god, angel, or power. These are her words. Ledbetter and Alice Bailey would later elaborate this, and so Ledbetter would link each ray with a type of magic, and then Alice Bailey would link it to like a quality or like an emotion, like this ray represents compassion or something like that. This one's creativity. It's kind of like a essential oil salesman or something.
Huh.
So next up on our list, that was around 1877. This astronomer, Italian astronomer Giovanni Schiaparelli, he was looking at Mars in a telescope, and he saw these paths as described on that picture, and he called them canali, which is Italian for canal, like a river, or channel, channel. But it's also the same as the Italian word for canal, which would be like a man-built river. So when it was translated into English, they translated canali to canal, and people thought, oh, there's beings on Mars, and they've made artificial rivers.
Got some irrigation canals.
That's right. And so that's kind of the idea of where Martians came from. So in the public sphere and in the public thought, they're Martians now. And so people are writing about Martians. Whereas it was sort of not a very common idea to think about inhabitants of other planets before this. And this was just like a translation mistake, essentially.
He looks like a serious guy. He doesn't look like he'd be wearing a tinfoil hat.
No, he has a very elaborately groomed facial hair there.
For sure. He takes himself seriously. And his maps are pretty good too. I think he's put a lot of effort into making them accurate.
He did. So this Theosophist A.P. Sinet in 1880 and 1885 had a series of sessions where she channeled Kuthumi, which I misspelled there, and Moria, and they talk about the Great White Brotherhood, the Great White Lodge, and that links that to like mystical traditions of Tibet. Next we have this. They call him an occultist. I don't know if he's a theosophist. He's a French occultist, Saint Yves or Yves. I forget how you say that. In 1885, he says that in a book, I think it's a memoir, that like a group of Eastern initiates met him and taught him how to channel so-called ascended masters. And this is where the term ascended masters comes from. And those ascended masters taught him about an antediluvian civilization that governed the whole world, and it was called Agartha. This is where Agartha comes from. Now, this is 14 years after the coming race, so this isn't even a new idea. This is almost like verbatim from that book, except for the name of this civilization, right?
Yeah.
So it's they're sort of repeating themselves at this point. What their channelings are almost all saying the same thing between each other. And in this era, we start seeing the output of H.G. Wells. And he's a pretty interesting figure. He was a member of the Fabian Society. And he was also in a cybernetics research group called the Coefficient Club. They kind of bumped elbows with a lot of, you could almost call them globalist circles, like the Huxley families, like all those people that would be super instrumental in like UNESCO, starting these like big organizations that would later be like integrated into the UN. This is sort of like the people H.G. Wells was hanging out with. And he wrote a couple of books that would inform how people would think about aliens. Man of the Year Million was a short story. It described like how humans would evolve into, but it basically describes gray aliens. He's like, oh, they'll become tall, they'll get big heads, big eyes, like their sexual organs will go away. Sort of like paints a picture of what a stereotypical gray would look like. 5 years later, he does War of the Worlds, which is a contemporary story about an alien invasion, perhaps the first story about an alien invasion of the Earth. He also wrote the book The First Men in the Moon, not on the moon.
In the moon.
I'm not quite sure what that means. I don't know too much about that book, but he wrote that not too long after War of the Worlds. And then right before his death, he wrote a book called The New World Order.
Wow.
And it's about all the nations, all the governments coming together to form a one world government.
I wonder if he was an agent then of,
I think he's rubbing elbows with like some pretty upper crust families that were involved in setting up all that stuff. So I mean, maybe he's more than an agent. Maybe he's a planner, even.
Yeah.
Like.
I wonder if they all plan this stuff together and then they pick a foil to come out and put his name on the book and be the front man for the ideas.
Oh, I'm sure. And like the Coefficient Club, I believe that eventually, like Alan Turing would join that, and he was interested in how to design a program that mimicked the human brain. And like so, he actually Alan Turing in those days actually wrote a paper on what we'd call neural nets or sometimes people call it AI, like modern computer programs.
Yeah.
That like are like machine learning. He actually wrote the foundations of it while he was working for the Coefficient Club on like a grant they gave him, and
wow.
He was trying to characterize the human brain as a machine, so that you can manipulate it. That's what the Coefficient Club was into. So like he was involved with that stuff because he was interested in it, and he was instrumental in thinking about how to control systems of people. So like the fact he's writing all these books and all these ideas that would later become popular, I don't know if that's the best way to say it, like would penetrate the cultural mindset, is sort of proof of what he was interested in, what he was doing behind the scenes.
Yeah, I wonder if it was his AI that was helping you out with sending you the links.
It's possible, man. It's possible. I keep getting all these crazy papers by email. I got a few today. Maybe I should have looked at them. Maybe I'd have some more material, but I'm not really hurting for that right now. So next up on our list, after The First Man in the Moon, is The Journey to the Moon. It's a French movie. It's actually based on Jules Verne's... sorry, I'm going back to see exactly what it is. From the Earth to the Moon. That's exactly what it's based on. And it starts off with a bunch of magicians and what looks like medieval Europe, and they're like plotting this trip to the moon, and then they all... What do? They put top hats on?
Well, at first they meet up, and they're in secret. And they're wearing like wizard clothes, like with
they have like the pointy hats with the stars on them.
Yeah, and they have this meeting where they decide they're gonna shoot a bullet up to the moon, and go up there, and then they all kind of agree what they're gonna do, and then they magically change all their clothes change from wizard gear to like business suits, and politician sort of garb, and then they bring people in to tell them their plan. They're basically like wizards in secret, planning everything, and then changing their hat, and becoming a politician or a businessman in order to tell the profane what their plan is.
Yeah, and then so they shoot the men up to the moon on a cannon, and then they get up there, and there's like people living on the moon. Silenoids, I believe they're called, or Silenids. And then there's like a shootout, like boop boop. They're like shooting guns and like having war on the moon to take it over.
Yeah, it's a great movie. I think it was like
Yeah.
one of the first motion pictures, actually. What?
Yeah, it was one of the first like big like wide releases.
Yeah, and it's funny how the first thing it's probably not funny that they'd use that medium for propaganda, but it was sort of padding the way for on NASA and a trip to the moon in real life, if you can call it real life. If
I got this guy up here.
Oh, this guy. Who's this guy?
This guy. Who's this Joker?
Who's this guy?
We'll get more into him later. I just kind of have him up here. There's an old quote. I see quoted everywhere. I could not find the source for it. I have like the complete works of Aleister Crowley on my computer, but I can't search in the PDFs. I did not want to look through all of his work to find this quote. But here's the quote. It says, "Today they call them angels and demons. Tomorrow they'll call them something else." I don't know if he actually said that, but people say it as if he did. So I guess I'll say he said that. And I guess he's talking about people being like, there's aliens. There's extraterrestrials. There's beings other than ourselves in the universe. And they once called them angels and demons, and now they're the other, right? I have them up here because in 1917 was the Alamantra working, where he opened a porthole and channeled this little fella, Lamb, who I just realized a few days ago that Alamantra has the word lamb in it. I don't know how I didn't notice that before.
It's a lamb mantra.
That's right. And many observers say he looks something like the modern depiction of a gray alien, this little guy. I believe the OTO has like an initiatory ritual where they like stare at the picture of Lamb, and then you'll receive some kind of spiritual insight or something.
Just from looking at the picture?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. Like a magic eye, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Alistair's art is a little bit two dimensional for my
yeah, it doesn't
taste.
have perspective.
But
really.
Yeah, he's kind of
I will
creepy,
say,
isn't he, Lamb?
I'll bring it up actually later. Okay. We'll get back to it.
Is that how they described the Daja Kool and those other white brothers looking?
They were always depicted as humans or human-like, or being former humans.
Former humans. Kind
of. Well, I'll get into that in a bit.
Okay.
We're not in the timeline yet, but that's kind of how they were portraying it. The same year as the Alamantra working, in which a porthole was opened, we have the Fatima apparitions in 1917. I cannot remember a whole lot off the top of my head. I know that there are Marian apparitions in Spain. Yeah, Spain. Fatima, of course, is the name of Muhammad's daughter, which is kind of weird. Because that's the town got its name in the Andalusian conquest, right? So, yeah, Marian apparitions appearing in Fatima is kind of a weird thing. Anyway, they was said the sun moved in the sky. Mary was visible for all who came. At least initially it wasn't. I think just the three children could see her at first, but then everyone had faith and they could see Mary in the sky. And then 3 secrets were delivered to one of the girls. And the Catholic Church only ever made public 2 of the secrets. So there's this third secret of Fatima, which is yet to be revealed. There's many rumors on what that is. Do you have anything about this?
Oh, yeah, I don't know. it kind of reminds me of that battle that was, that they made the woodcut of. Sounded like there was some crazy stuff like that going on. I think that the kids went out there by themselves to get firewood, and they saw Mary at first, or was it Fatima at first? I'm not sure, but it was like on a specific day, like June 13th or something like that. And then the apparition told them to come back to the same spot, like either every year or every month. I think it was like every year, and they would come back and get more and more. And then eventually they told a bunch of people, and so it was a kind of a building process. And then tons of people saw it, but not everybody there could see it.
Right.
So it's people like, the skeptics say that it was a shared hallucination for the people
like
that
the
could
mass
see
hysteria
it.
event thing.
Yeah, which seems bizarre, unless there's some sort of, like they can do voice to skull technology. Maybe there was some sort of wayward magnetic field that they got in and made them see this same vision for everybody. But that kind of, even if it was that, I think that it seems like a supernatural situation.
Right.
If everybody's gonna hallucinate something and it's the same thing, it seems pretty rare that it would be something recognizable for everyone. It might be like a color I could see, or like a hum, but that wasn't.
Some commenters say, "Oh, the sun moving around the sky must have been a UFO."
Yeah, I've seen a lot of speculation on that. I think like Coast to Coast, talk about it.
So in 1920, H.P. Lovecraft begins publishing material in his Cthulhu mythos, basically just talking about this cosmic horror stuff. And he wasn't very popular in his time, but he sort of put out the idea of man being in a cold, lonely, expansive, empty universe filled with malevolent entities who were aliens. And that kind of mirrors the what might you call it? Secular materialist idea of the universe as sort of a gigantic, empty place, and we're sort of insignificant or at an insignificant scale in the universe. H.P. Lovecraft sort of predicts this existential cosmic horror with his work. And it later be very influential, but in his time he was not very influential at all.
Yeah, he seems a little bit depressed.
Say what?
He seemed like he was a little depressed.
He was very depressed, and then he kind of got less depressed later in his life. But he was very isolated and lonely, and he primarily socialized via correspondences.
Oh, wow. So he didn't even go out and talk to people.
Mm-hmm.
He was an internet shut-in of...
He really didn't like Jews, right? And he married a Jew. And I since after that he kind of lightened up, I think.
Well, that's cool. It sounds problematic if you don't like Jews to marry one.
I know, but I guess he really turned over a new leaf. Maybe go out of the house a few times a year.
That's good.
Yeah. One more thing. I've heard people say of H.P. Lovecraft that like his father and his grandfather were high-level Freemasons, and he had access to all these strange books, and they informed his worldview, and he had all these mystical ideas. And you know what? I was recently reading a work of his, and also Tracy was reading that work on an earlier show where it was like the hounds of something with the curved rooms and the angled rooms.
Yeah.
And it's talking about like a man, he's imagining himself as like a priest of the mysteries in Egypt. That was the thing. There was quite a bit of esoteric knowledge being communicated in that passage. That was just like H.P. Lovecraft wrote. So he had that material to write that passage, right? So,
yeah. Well,
he knew about that stuff.
It's pretty strange how much Lovecraft comes back in modern day. Conversations about a lot of things. Like, I think Gordy Rose. He's one of the guys that he's in charge of the AI company with No, it's not the AI. It's um, the computers. Um, what are they called? You know, the black quantum
Quantum
computers.
computers,
Yeah, he
qubits.
qubits. Yeah, he makes a lot of references to Lovecraft's old ones when he talks about the entities that they get their resources from when doing computations on the um, quantum computing. So it's kind of eerie.
Oh, what's also relevant, I forgot to think about, was in Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness, right? They go on an expedition to the South Pole. They see gigantic penguins in Antarctica, and there's old ruins, old alien ruins there, right? And they're sort of like leaching out, and they're like corrupting the wildlife,
Oh yeah.
which will kind of be echoed in a second. So now I have this. Maria Orsic founds the Vril Society in 1921. Every sort of establishment or authoritative voice says, "This is fake." But I'm like, where did the pictures come from? Conceivably, the story goes, there were certain in Germany, there were Masonic fraternities. They kind of make these historical magical societies, one of which was the Thule Society. And then they would have an offshoot called the Vril Society, echoing the book, The Coming Race. And this Vril Society was headed allegedly by this medium, Maria Orsic. The story goes they would later be employed by the Ahnenerbe in around the time in like 1930s Nazi Germany. And it said that they employed so-called Vril maidens, and they'd grow their hair out real long. And they said it would help them channel spirits, off-world entities, so as to receive new technologies and information.
You know, I've heard hair being used as an antenna before. Like, it's one of the reasons why they shave your head when you get into the military, because it like sort of cuts you off from receiving stuff and sort of reprograms you. Like, I don't know if it's a true story, but I heard of the U.S. Army they enlisted a Native American tracker, and he had long hair and he could track all kinds of stuff, and he was very in tune. And he went through boot camp and they shaved his head, and he could no longer track because his antenna was gone.
Well, your hair does act as a reservoir for static electricity, so it is electrically active. And you have magnetoreceptors in your pineal gland. Possible. I mean, it's possible. It's just like a human sense that's underdeveloped as far as like our knowledge of it is concerned. You know?
Yeah.
Just like electrical magnetic. Because I know that there's a study that showed that dogs, more often than not, will align themselves with the north-south axis when they take a poop.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, they have like many animals have types of magnetoreception, so it's nowhere outlandish to suggest that humans have it also.
They got to point their tail towards the dog star. Seriously.
So I think, what was it? Almost 50 years before this, 1925, St. Ives, he coins the term ascended masters. Ledbetter, in this time, he's become quite old, becoming something of a Rasputin-looking figure. He coins the term Great White Brotherhood. This comes from the book Masters of the Path. And in this book, he says, the Great White Brotherhood is an initiatory society similar to the Masonic fraternity in its ranks and degrees and initiatory practices. But he says it includes members of the heavenly host, members of other planets, and the community of alive and deceased adepts. So it's saying extraterrestrials, angels or stars, and dead and alive mystics, what the Great White Brotherhood is. Alice Bailey claims to channel the Great White Brotherhood between 1920 and 1949, and there's a posthumous book that had all of her channelings in it. And Crowley identified his Argon Astron, the AA, his elite secret society, he would call it the Great White Brotherhood, or specifically say the same thing, or earthly order of the Great White Brotherhood. So all these occultists get their 2 cents in about the Great White Brotherhood.
Did they describe how they looked? Did they look like Greys?
I've included some pictures in it. They're still looking quite a bit like humans.
I think we maybe you answered that already.
Well, it'll change in a bit. We'll get there in a second.
Okay, cool.
So soon we get Guy Ballard. He coins the I am activity, and of course is a reference to the name of God in Exodus. I am that I am. 1932. So he begins a lecture series this year teaching Theosophy and on the lecture circuit in the United States. So he coined the term Ascended Masters. I guess the French guy didn't make up Ascended Masters. This guy did. And his organization says he became the Ascended Master Godfrey upon his death. He apotheosed into this spiritual earth protector. Okay? So 1934, Alice Bailey claims to channel Jawal Kool. Here's a picture of Jawal Kool. It just looks like a Tibetan dude.
Okay. Yeah.
And she calls him the Tibetan. This is more Tibet stuff. I was also thinking about Alice Bailey's book, The Externalization of the Hierarchy. So this is kind of, it's about like rolling out this esoteric order to the public, making them aware and like initiating them, right? And I was actually thinking how this correlates to the modern idea of disclosure, like preparing the public for disclosure of aliens, right? And they're even saying that the Great White Brotherhood includes extraterrestrials.
Yeah.
So how is what's being said in the externalization of the hierarchy different from what people can consider disclosure now? It's almost the same idea.
Yeah, it's coded. Those that know, those with eyes to see, know what's going on.
So in these movements, specifically like I Am Activity and Alice Bailey, we get this idea of Master Jesus. So they take like the Christian theology of Jesus, instead of saying he's a pre-existent being at one with God through which the earth was created, they say he's just a dude who was born and he sort of like apotheosed upon death to become an ascended master. Others say he was already an ascended master before and he's just continually reincarnating. It's kind of like what do they call it in Buddhism, a bodhisattva, or like I've come across this idea a lot in the Gnostic sects of the Middle East, like different, like the Alawites and the Druze have this idea of like a continually reincarnating figure. So they're sort of like altering this Christian theology, as you might expect, to sort of include Jesus into the ranks of the Ascended Masters. So here's a bunch of different Ascended Masters hanging out in the astral realm or wherever they go on Sundays.
They go to In-N-Out Burger, I guess.
In-N-Out Burger, that's right. So in 1935, Heinrich Himmler in Nazi Germany, he founds the Ahnenerbe. This has been described as the first state-sponsored occult research organization. They were concerned with finding the Aryan races, origins, and sort of like ancient Aryan culture. Now, the term Aryan was changed after World War II to be the word Indo-European. I'm sure if a lot of people know that. And you can look up the Yamnaya culture, and this would actually be the ancient Aryan culture of which they speak. So they're actually talking about something, and the Yamnaya culture would impregnate Europe. It would impregnate India, Persia, all these regions with lots of different ideas. And the Nazis sought to find artifacts, relics, and ancient knowledge that would, I don't know, maybe they wanted to find ancient technology in that sort of archaeological effort. So 1 year after Ahnenerbe is founded, let me get my notes on this. So it says, according to writer J. von Helsing, an unknown flying object crashed near the Schwarzwald, the Black Forest, near Wewelsburg Castle, and recovered. So
Wow.
Wewelsburg Castle is where like this black sun insignia is. There's a ritual chamber. There's different occultists associated with the higher up of the Nazi party that went to Wewelsburg Castle to do rituals. I believe Michael Aquino would come here later and do some kind of ritual in this very chamber. So it's sort of like an occultically charged area, and apparently, according to this writer, a UFO crashed there. And then they like harvested the technology to build build military technologies. 2 years after that, Anna Urbe sponsored an expedition, a German expedition to Tibet. And Himmler had been wanting to go to Tibet for a while. They eventually allowed him to go with his team of occult researchers, and they went around talking to monks, politicians, all kinds of stuff, and just kind of had like a broad anthropological study. I think they went there because there's a type of Buddhism that's practiced primarily in Tibet called Vajrayana. And this is sort of like the left-hand path Buddhism. It's like black magic, esoteric Buddhism, and they're concerned with what's called the Vajra, which is said to be a weapon of the gods. And it's kind of like they say it's the combination of the immovable object and the, what do they say? The unstoppable force. It's the Vajrayana. And this old Aryan tradition was almost was primarily practiced here. So I feel like they went here to sort of talk to people and get an idea of it. Not only that, there's all this theosophical ideas of the ascended masters, largely being from Tibet, right? Oh, you know what? I forgot to say in the Agartha thing that the subterranean civilization of Agartha, it was supposedly under Tibet. So this sort of ties into this like hollow earth idea, ancient beings living underground, having magical technologies, and the Germans wanting to like appropriate that.
That's why all those monks could reach higher states of consciousness,
right?
Because they had a connection.
So that same year, the War of the Worlds radio play goes out, read by Orson Welles. So I looked up. He has no relation to H.G. Wells, though they did have an interview together. They did meet. They're not related, or so they say. And this caused a big panic. People tuned in. They thought the Earth was actually being invaded, right? So this is a big demoralization effort as well. People who probably never even thought about people on other planets suddenly became an immediate reality to them, even though it was an illusion. It definitely changed the way they thought about their place in the universe. This event, this
social experiment.
Yeah. I'm going to go back a bit.
Yeah.
To this, because I have some stuff in my notes I didn't talk about real fast, which I just think it's funny. Ledbetter said he saw Dval Kuhl teleport into a room in which he and Madame Blavatsky were sitting.
Wow.
And then they say Dval Kuhl coordinates the activities of the seven masters of the seven rays, and it's his job to function as an earthly intermediary to telepathically communicate this stuff to Alice Bailey. Okay.
He sure does have a too cool for school expression on his face.
Oh, yeah.
James Dean, almost, you know?
So I have this book on here. This is a pretty good book. If you can find it, Secret Agent 666, it goes over how Aleister Crowley was employed by the MI6 in the war. He had a lot of like German lodges he would visit. He pretty transparently played both sides of the war, and MI6 didn't really seem to care as long as they were getting information, because he was also like essentially providing information to the Germans. But I believe Rudolf Hess. So the whole arrangement with Rudolf Hess taking a secret flight to Britain and being arrested was set up by Aleister Crowley. He sent them a letter, was like, "Hey, Rudolf, you should come, like, meet me in the dead of night in a field." And so apparently Rudolf Hess goes out and like parachutes out of a plane wearing full occult regalia and like lands in a field, and then the like British are there waiting for him and arrest him. Just completely made a fool of him in that way. So, and we see this Aleister Crowley being employed as like a military intelligence officer, which we'll start seeing more occultists in military intelligence positions. 1 year after the German expedition to Tibet, the Nazis go to Antarctica.
All right.
And found New Schwabenland. And they definitely made a base there. I believe there was like a documentary that aired in Russia TV not too long ago that like they actually found a Nazi base there, like an old empty depot, and just like filmed it. But this sort of ties into like the lore around the Hollow Earth is there's like a hole or an entrance in Antarctica to go to the inner Earth. And if the Nazis were interested in Tibet and Shambhala, being like a hidden kingdom under the earth, and Agartha and Theosophy and Vril and the Ascended Masters and these beings, with the antediluvian world government and the earth, you might see why they might be interested in going to Antarctica, should that stuff be true. 1942, this is after World War II began, is the Battle of Los Angeles. And this was in Los Angeles. It was this official report says that it was a Japanese spy balloon. It was over the city, and the army just went bananas on it, I guess, and like couldn't shoot it, and they eventually shot it down. But as you can see, there's a very bright there's an object, or maybe series of objects, that the military engaged and shot at, and lots of people reported being a bright light, and many people think it was a UFO.
Yeah, there's some pretty crazy stories about how they were just shooting at it from all sides, and everything was bouncing off.
Yeah, if it was a balloon, it would blow up.
Yeah.
Probably after one artillery round, just like one shell going off near it, I'm pretty sure it would blow up a balloon. But
balloons don't usually hover like that. They're always on the move, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Blowing around.
Maybe he had fans on it.
Maybe.
So the same year, the Manhattan Project starts. Nukes tie into a lot of this stuff. Oppenheimer, at least, was sort of like into Aryan mysticism. He apparently walked around with a Bhagavad Gita and like tried to evangelize it and get other people to read it. He was familiar with the Brahmastra weapon. And I believe after the war, and he was teaching some class, and someone was asking about the Trinity test, and they're like, "Was that the first nuclear detonation?" And he said, "Yes, the first in modern times." So he actually thought there used to human civilization used to have nukes, and that's what was being written about in the Mahabharata. And during the Trinity test, he quoted the Bhagavad Gita and said, "I am Shiva, the destroyer of worlds." So he kind of has like this, you might call like occult information of what the nuclear weapon was before it was developed, and then worked to develop it. 1944, towards the end of the war, is when you start getting reports of Foo Fighters, and I believe they were primarily described as either glowing balls of light or like little metallic orbs, and they'd kind of like hang out near the wings of a plane. And if I'm not mistaken, it wasn't just the American forces that saw them. I believe also the German and British forces saw the Foo Fighters.
Yeah.
And there's not much of an explanation for them. At the time, they thought they were just like German weapons. But I don't believe they were hostile. I don't think anyone ever described them as being hostile.
Yeah, it seems like they were observers.
Mm-hmm.
Or something, or some sort of unbridled energy, effect. Like they don't look like nuts and bolts UFOs.
Mm-hmm.
At least they don't sound like that. They sound like orbs.
Right, and like looking metallic just means you reflect the majority of light that the thing hits you. It doesn't mean you're made of metal.
Yeah.
If you want to think of that. Okay, the Trinity test is the next year. I believe in the third season of Twin Peaks. The idea is this particular test is what caused like a tear in the fabric of space-time that lets like all the Black Lodge spirits in to the Earth. It's pretty interesting.
Well, yeah.
1945, Werner von Braun is transferred to the United States, I believe in the summer, and by the fall, he is hooked up with a special military working group on rocketry. So he was the one who just developed the German ballistic missiles for the Germans, and he was transferred to the United States to do the same after the European theater. So 1 year after this was the Babylon working. Jack Parsons from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, another rocketry guy, and our good friend L. Ron Hubbard got together to do a ritual. It was in Pasadena, I believe. And they sought to get permission from Crowley. I have some excerpts from those communications. I think they're funny.
Yeah.
But you know what? That stuff may have not been saved. It's really unfortunate.
Oh.
Yeah, it looks like I must have got not saved. There was lots of shit talk with Crowley behind their backs, like talking to other people, being like, I don't know what they're doing. They seem pretty stupid. I wouldn't do this. They're pretty, you know. And after the Babylon working, Crowley really distanced himself from Jack Parsons. So Jack Parsons was almost like being crowned and anointed the successor in the OTO, but like he really got sidelined after this. But the idea of the Babylon working was to manifest the spirit of Babylon, so essentially like the whore of Babylon, into the world as a physical person, and sort of like bring about the end times, I suppose. Excuse me. I know I can't find this in a primary source like a diaries, but I know many esoteric commenters on this event will suggest that in the Alamantra working in 1917, Crowley opened a portal, talked to Lamb, and then closed it. But during this working, L. Ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons were inexperienced and opened up a portal and never closed it. I've read this from a number of people saying that, but once again, no primary sources. But that's an interesting thing to think about because of everything that happens immediately after this.
Yeah, especially UFO style events. It kind of starts picking up after this. The modern UFO era, huh?
Another thing is, it's often said that L. Ron Hubbard was naval intelligence. So Crowley was MI6, L. Ron Hubbard was naval intelligence, Jack Parsons was involved with the rocket propulsion, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which will later be incorporated into NASA. So Operation Highjump is the same year. I just learned today Admiral Byrd, who headed up Operation Highjump, was actually the first person, he led the first expedition to fly over the South Pole. So he'd be one of the only few people in the world to actually know the nature of the South Pole. Because he would have firsthand knowledge. That was like in the 1920s. So after the war, Operation Highjump kicks off. He's said to, or, you know, they go to check out Antarctica. It's often conflated that they went to Antarctica to like rout out Nazis still in New Schwabenland. I know that during the expedition, they lost like half their ships in Operation Highjump. So people think that they were engaged by an enemy. After Operation Highjump, Admiral Byrd went on to television and gave like a speech, and he said to be wary about enemies coming from over the poles. And like modern planes even now don't fly in that path, supposedly from pole to pole, right? They would go more equatorially. So and for an enemy to go over the pole would be like a lot of fuel, even like the North Pole. So you would have to think they would originate from there. That wouldn't to make any sense. There is some documentaries on Operation Highjump. And what I'm thinking of is actually when they cross the equator, they have like this ritual they put on. I think it's called like the Court of King Triton, and like all the sailors strip down into their underwear and they like kiss either the ring. I think the ring of King Triton, and they do like dress up as women and stuff. So like there's this weird seaman's occult ritual that they actually did before they went to Antarctica. And then you have a guy who was one of the few people who would have secondhand close knowledge of what the South Pole is actually like. And then he gets down there for this expedition.
Have you seen the interview that Admiral Byrd did? I think it was like with the Longines Watch Company. There's some pretty cool video going around. It's a lot of flat Earth stuff, but he talks about how there's so much more resources and land down there in Antarctica. Like there's so much. He just kind of goes on about how huge it is and how kind of far it goes. It sounds like. I mean, it's not the way that we see it now as being just a tiny ice covered little glacier.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you'll have to check that one out if you haven't seen it.
So the next year we get the Roswell incident of great fame, where supposedly alien craft crashed down near Roswell, New Mexico. I believe it said that there were little bodies recovered from the Roswell crash, something like that.
Yeah. One was alive, and 2 of them were dead when it happened, apparently.
Famously said to be a weather balloon. Here's some footage of the wreckage. As well, apparently this is an I-beam recovered from the crash. It has these glyphs on it, which look something like the Greek word eleftheria, which means freedom.
Wow.
Which is kind of weird.
Very weird.
Which might indicate that such things are not actually that foreign to us. They're not actually from light years and light years away. Now, the same year, I believe this is 2 days later, after the Roswell crash, Kenneth Arnold sees crafts near Mount Rainier. I think he's in the Air Force. He's flying planes.
He's a private pilot.
Huh?
He's a private pilot.
Oh, he's private?
Yeah,
okay.
He's like a business
flying
owner
near
or something.
Mount Rainier, and he sees a formation of these crafts, and he calls them flying saucers. I think the very next day, Harold Dahl on Maury Island sees some UFOs. And after he saw them, he went public with it, and not too long after, he was privately threatened by some strange men wearing dark clothing. And this would be the first sighting, if you will, of the Men in Black. So these 3 things happened in like the same week, all at once.
Wow.
So June 20th to June 24th, I believe, 1947. Oh, and Maury Island is on the Puget Sound.
Yeah.
That same year, this guy, George Van Tassel, he moves to the Mojave Desert, and he forms what he calls the UFO community, and he's kind of starting the first UFO religion. In 1948, this guy, Rudolf Schriever, he was a engineer for the Nazis in the war, and he talks about building disc-shaped flying crafts, and he says the blueprints were stolen from him. Stolen from the workshop. He didn't know where they went, but he worked on them. He had 2 interviews in Der Spiegel in 1948 and 1952. So this is the first public, you can call it disclosure, idea of these Nazi UFOs. Even now, people say they're not real. There's been different people who've come out with different degrees of evidence concerning them. They kind of tie into the lore of Admiral Byrd going down to Antarctica to fight the Nazi UFOs and New Schwabenland, and then half his forces get destroyed, so he retreats. And then that's where he's talking about enemies coming from over the poles because there'd be Nazi UFOs in Antarctica. That's the idea. In 1950, L. Ron Hubbard publishes Dianetics. Before that, he writes what's called Affirmations. Affirmations is like a self-hypnosis book he wrote, where he's like telling himself to give himself over to his spiritual guide. I believe he calls her Diana. He's like, oh, I can hear the voice of my spiritual guide over all others. And he's like, I have telekinesis and can read people's minds. So he's like trying to hypnotize himself into having magical powers. And like he has a spirit guide that gives him these powers. Pretty strange book. And then he writes, not too long after he wrote that, he publishes Dianetics. Around this time, Air Force Intelligence, the Air Technical Intelligence Center begins Project Blue Book in 1952. There were actually two previous UFO programs before this, if I can find their names. Project Sign in 1947 and Project Grudge in 1948. So those only lasted about 2 years apiece, and then Project Blue Book ran from 1952 to 1970. So this was the government going around interviewing people who had seen UFOs, categorizing whether they thought they were credible or not. And some portion of them they decided were credible. It was something like 0.5% or something they decided they couldn't explain with any other way, any other explanation. Okay, that same year, this guy, George Adamski, I believe he's Polish, he says he encounters Nordic aliens. This is the first time we see Nordic aliens popping up. And they're telepathic. They land in the UFO. I believe they tell him they're from Venus. And they tell him, you got to stop those nukes. You got to stop nukes so there can be world peace. Now, some people call the Nordics Garthans to sort of tie into this inner Hollow Earth, inner world story.
It's kind of funny. There's a lot of environmentally concerned alien stories.
Yes, they're either concerned about the environment or nukes.
Or nukes, yeah. Like the day the Earth stood still.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, George Van Tassel, who recently in the story moved to the Mojave Desert to start the UFO community, he starts essentially a religion called Ashtar Command. And it concerns this character, Ashtar Shiran, who you see here, who's essentially a Nordic alien, and he's also an ascended master, essentially. He, like, watches over the Earth. In the system of Ashtar Command, it said that Ashtar and Jesus, they're both equivalent. They're both messengers of the universal mind of God. So we have Jesus being like a human who becomes a godlike figure to being equivalent to an alien who's kind of doing the same stuff. But he's like space Jesus, essentially, Nordic space Jesus, this Ashtar Shiran. And in 1952, it was said he entered the solar system with Ashtar Galactic Command to warn humanity about the hydrogen bomb.
Well, that was nice of him.
And the UFO community is now called Ashtar's Golden Circle, which reminded me of the Knights of the Golden Circle, which was a Masonic adjacent group, which would later become the Ku Klux Klan.
Wow, is it the White Brotherhood?
That's, the
Great White Brotherhood?
Easily read into it. With all these space Nordics. Oh, and then there's the idea of the root races, right? In Theosophy, there's like 7 races that spawn from a root race. Like, it has to do with secular time. So there's like a golden age and a catastrophe. Then only one race survives, and then they seed the new races of the Earth, and then another catastrophe happens. So the previous root race was the Aryans, and then so there's a catastrophe being the flood, and then they split into the modern races, and then there'd be a new root race. So like Ledbetter in the 20s in California, he was concerned with eugenics and breeding up the new root race. He wanted to breed everybody together to make a new modern Egyptian, and that'd be the new root race that would take us into the age of Aquarius. So
Wow.
There's that too. Oh, and about Ashtar Command, with like the 7 rays and stuff, he's always depicted with a 7 pointed star. Kind of reminds me of the 7 rays.
Well, naturally.
Naturally. In 1953, L. Ron Hubbard starts Scientology, which I consider a UFO religion. Many do. There's Xenu. There's the space opera in OT3. There's the spacefaring DC-17s that deliver souls. And there's some more stuff, too, and we'll get to later. Here's some stuff about Hubbard. He would describe Crowley as a close friend. He equates the practices of Scientology to magic ritual, using tarot and magic cults of the 8th to 12th centuries. I don't know who he's talking about other than the Assassins and the Templars. He also says that the book Master Therian by Aleister Crowley is the only modern work that has anything to do with them. Let's see. Oh, during a Philadelphia course, Hubbard jokes that he is the Prince of Darkness, which is met with laughter from the audience. And I guess it's like a duping delight thing, huh?
Yeah. I bet he was full of some duping delights.
Year after that, another UFO cult comes up called the Seekers, or the Brotherhood of the 7 Rays. And it's hard to find information about this group. They're essentially Christian rapturists that had like UFOs tied into it, but they also had this Brotherhood of the 7 Rays, which sounds very theosophical. They basically just are like the millennialists, where they come up with a date and they're like, oh, we're gonna be raptured. And this time they were gonna be raptured by aliens, by UFOs. And that did not come to pass. Or maybe it did. But this is one UFO religion that really shows the connection to Theosophy. The next year, Werner von Braun meets with Walt Disney explicitly to popularize the idea of going to the moon. And at least they were going to plan to make several documentaries about it to foster a desire in the public to go to the moon. At least one documentary was made. And this actually reminds me, I forgot to say, in Project Blue Book, one idea the government floated out before starting Blue Book was to contact Disney and have them debunk UFOs to the populace.
Wow.
And so you can kind of see the government, the military in this case, working with Walt Disney, who of course has Masonic ties and was a member of the Order of Day Malay and all that stuff, into working with them for the sorts of, you call it space propaganda, debunking UFOs, trying to manufacture consent to go to the moon.
Yeah, it seems like Disney was the go-to guy for brainwashing and propaganda, pretty much nationally, I guess, or worldwide back then.
Yeah. Still is pretty much.
Yeah. There's Disney tentacles in pretty much everything, if you look at the charts.
So 3 years after that, NASA is formed. Within the year, JPL is rolled into NASA, which is Jack Parsons' group. Same year, NASA incorporates Werner von Braun's outfit, which is called Army Ballistic Missile Agency. I'm going to have to leave you for one moment. I'm going to need to go to the restroom. I provided you with some material to fill my absence. I'll be right back.
No worries. Let's see here. So, Harrison has provided me with some jokes here. Some alien jokes. Why did the Martian throw beef on the asteroid? Because he wanted a little meteor. How do Martians eat their ice creams in space? How do Martians eat their ice creams in space? In floats. Because it floats, ice cream floats. What is a Martian's favorite chocolate bar? That would be a Mars bar. Ba-dum-bum. What do you get if you cross a kangaroo with an alien? Well, when you cross a kangaroo with an alien, you get a marsupial. That was a good one. What did the alien say to the cat? The alien said to the cat, "Take me to your litter." Take me to your litter. Let's see. Where would an alien park his spaceship? He would park it in a parking meteor. What did the alien get the baby to go to sleep?
What?
He rocked it. Rocket. He rocketed. He rocket.
He rocket.
He rocket.
Like some people, they don't like say the ed on the end of a past tense. You know?
Oh yeah. How did you? He rocket. He
Right.
rocked it. What do farmers need to create crop circles?
Huh.
They need a protractor. You know, not like an amateur tractor. They need a protractor. What kind of currency do aliens use? They use Starbucks. It looks like they go on.
Okay. Well, we need some insurance, so.
Some
I think we're
insurance.
set.
Yeah.
In case I have to go again, or you do, we'll be set.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's
Okay.
resume.
Resume, please.
All right. So in the 60s, there's a cult in Australia. I don't know if I'd call it a UFO cult, but they're called the Great White Brotherhood, also known as the Family. I believe they're like a CIA MK Ultra offshoot because they are giving LSD to children. They are taking over hospitals. They're trying to breed perfect Aryans. Essentially, they're trying to like recapitulate the pure Aryan breed to serve as the root race for the next cataclysm to populate the age of Aquarius. And Julian Assange was actually raised in this cult. And we'll see Julian Assange come up a bit more in this presentation, but that heavily informs, I think, Julian Assange's approach to living. And also, he's been dyeing his hair white since then. So all the kids in his cult, even though they were trying to be bred as perfect Aryans, they would bleach their hair blonde to pretend that they were like purebred. So I think that's pretty interesting. That Assange has kept doing that even in his captivity in the Ecuadorian embassy. Since
That's kind of
Jeb's
crazy.
Jeb, are you still around? I can read some jokes.
It's like, have you seen Village of the Damned?
I haven't. No.
It's a movie by what's his name? The same guy that the director of They Live, and
John Carpenter.
John Carpenter, yeah, and they're like everybody in this town, they like pass out during the day on this one day, and they're all asleep for like a certain amount of time, like a few hours, and like right outside of the edge of the city limits, you know, everybody's awake, but like if you walk in past the city limits, you instantly pass out. And everybody got like, not everybody, but there were like, I think there was like 7 pregnancies that happened on that day. 7 sets of twins were conceived, and they all had like white hair once they were born, and they had like psychic powers. It was a pretty interesting, pretty cool movie.
Kind of sounds like the Boys from Brazil, with all the twins.
I haven't seen that.
Well, I'm just talking about the idea of like all those Nazi scientists going to Argentina, and there's like a region in Argentina that has like statistically higher rates of twins than anywhere else in the world.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, it was a. I think the name Village of the Damned was it was from a Fortean book from John Fort.
Oh, really?
I think so. It was from a story from a Fortean book. I'd have to watch it again. It's a pretty good movie. It's got Superman in it. You know, Christopher Reeve is in it.
So
Anyhow.
in 1961 is the Barney and Betty Hill abduction case. I believe this is the first case that has the missing time element to it, right? They were like driving along, and then all of a sudden it was like 3 hours later than they thought it was.
Yeah.
So they like don't remember anything, so they go into a hypnotist, and they get hypnotic regression, and they remember the events. And this is, I believe, the first case with gray aliens in it.
Yeah.
And also they're called Zeta Reticulans here. So from the beginning, they're equated with Zeta Reticuli. Now, what I want to say about that is, with like the modern cosmological model of the universe, the stars in a constellation are not close to each other at all, necessarily.
Yeah. One star in a constellation could be a whole galaxy, you know, that's light years behind the other stars, you know, from our perspective.
Right. And a lot of these alien stories, or with abductions, the aliens say, "Oh, we're from this constellation. We're from this constellation," and that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's never like we're from. Well, sometimes it's like we're from this star, but a lot of times they'll say this constellation. And so, with a more like limited cosmology, if the night sky, the fixed stars, is like a surface or a region, bounded region near the other stars, that starts to make more sense from what the aliens, so-called, are telling the abductees. Now, in this case, the aliens say they're from Zeta Reticuli, but I believe they show Betty Hill the star map, right?
Yeah.
So she sees the star map, and she like draws it. And much later, I believe there's like a mathematical model. They say, "Oh," because for the longest time they said this star map doesn't show anything, and then they looked at it. They said, "Oh, it's actually from a different perspective. It's from Zeta Reticuli." And then so if you look at the star map this way, it's actually all correct.
Well, that's pretty convenient that they figured out what the Zeta Reticuli see, I guess, you know?
Right. So that's a very influential abduction case that was pretty popularized and people were familiar. And so a lot of those elements we're going to see in later abduction cases.
Yeah, it sort of became canon for the style of UFO experiences for a long time after that. Well, I mean, 20 or 30 years, I guess.
Yeah. So 5 years later, at Point Pleasant, Virginia, is the Mothman phenomena. There's lots of weird sightings, poltergeist activities, UFO sightings in this time frame. So people are seeing the Mothman, who is like a figure with wings with glowing eyes. We really focus on that. So I'm going to focus on this fellow on the right, who is Indrid Cold, otherwise called the Smiley Man, who is seen in the town at around the same time as Mothman. One farmer said he saw a flying saucer come down. Indrid Cold got off of it, and he just looked like a normal human, wearing like a suit, and communicated with him telepathically, saying he was from another place, and also said some strange stuff like, "My country is not as strong as yours," which is pretty strange. And then on another occasion, the same man saw Indrid Cold also come off a UFO in a different scenario. Other people saw this figure standing over them when they were awoke from sleep. Wow. So it's a very strange set of phenomena, the Mothman at Point Pleasant, but Indrid Cold in particular sort of ties the UFO experience into it.
That kind of relates into the sleep paralysis UFO, or I mean alien experience, almost.
Right. 1 year later, the first modern animal mutilation was reported in Alamosa, Colorado in I believe like 5 years since then, there were like 1,000 cases and like $1 million worth of property damage reported. So it wasn't, this sort of thing wasn't common at all before 1967. Now, apparently in medieval records, there's a few cases where similar things are mentioned, where like a lot of animals just are dead with missing organs and stuff. Sometimes animal mutilations, they say, show very precise tools, very precise cuts, so as to rule out predation. I believe the FBI actually investigated it in 1973, and they looked at the satanic angle. I don't think they looked at the UFO angle. And some satanic cults have actually been connected to animal mutilation. This picture right here, I believe, is actually from the Skinwalker Ranch, which I'm not going to get a whole lot into during this presentation, but it ties in some like poltergeist spiritual activity with UFO stuff. 1 year after that, Eric von Daniken writes Chariot of the Gods. So this is a very influential book. It advances the ancient astronaut hypothesis that all the gods of the ancient religions were actually retellings or just ancient reckoning of alien visitation, and that aliens brought technology to man, and mankind used that technology to build ancient megalithic structures and the like. And of course, this view continues on the History Channel and Ancient Aliens. It's a pretty common viewpoint, not to be considered in this day and age, but it was pretty, you could say, like mind-blowing at the time. It was a revolution. It was a very popular book.
Even like non-UFO style people read it. Like my mom read it. She was.
I read it when I was like 10.
Did you?
Yeah.
It was a pretty good book. I read it when I was older than 10. Yeah, it opens a lot of questions.
Yeah. So, some of it, I mean, like, a lot of it you can just throw out with, I don't know, whatever. Yeah. I'm not going to say stuff like that. Okay. Same year, Close Encounters of the Third Kind comes out. That was a Spielberg production. I believe I once saw this like a retro theater, and they had like this big to-do before it came on, almost like a documentary of it before the movie premiered. And like Spielberg was like, "Oh, I used to believe that the government was hiding aliens from us," and that was like his impetus for making this work, and not any other kind of impetus to make it. But
yeah, and it's funny how he used Devil's Tower as the meetup point.
And I think David Paulides of Missing 411 says there's actually quite a bit of disappearances around Devil's Tower.
Wow. That's pretty interesting.
And also, he says a lot of landmarks named Devil's X have lots of disappearances around them.
Huh. Yeah, kind of makes you wonder whether it's a chicken or an egg thing. You know, was it named Devil because nefarious things were happening there for a long time, or was it named Devil and then nefarious things started happening there?
Right. He thinks it's the former, that it comes from just like weird things happening from to pioneers in the area. So in the next year, we have Apollo 11. We landed on the moon, guys, with these hot shots. Nothing to see here. Moving on. 1974, Claude Vorilhon starts Raelism in 1974. It took me a while to realize that the name of the religion was Ra-El, being the Egyptian god and the Canaanite god El, right? Ra-El-ism. And in Ra-El-ism, the founder states that like all the prophets, like Jesus, Moses, they're all aliens. Angels, they're just aliens. And you can, I believe, part of the ideas of the religion are you can become immortal through cloning. So they were behind the cloning fiasco. But they sort of inherit the idea of, from like Ashtar Command, from these earlier UFO religions, where they equate Jesus and like Ashtar, like as an ascended master, Jesus as an ascended master, equivalent to an alien. Then now they're just saying Jesus is an alien. They're saying all divine phenomena of the past is just material and it's aliens. But they derive like a religion from this. And we'll see this crop up a bit more. But you can also notice that virilin looks quite similar to the word vril.
Yeah. See, maybe it was influenced by vril.
I very much think so.
Yeah, I think that one of their beliefs is that that if they gain the Temple Mount area and built a space base there,
an embassy,
yeah, then our space brothers will come and rescue us from all the terrible things that we've done to the Earth, move us into the New Age.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm waiting for that to happen.
Let's see if they win the contest to build the third temple.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean.
All the other factions who want to do that. Let's see if they get it.
Well, you know, if there's a chance for us to meet aliens, they should just kind of bow out of the race, right?
Right. Same year, Heaven's Gate is founded. So they had been around quite a while before what would happen in the 90s. So the founders apparently read, this is from Wikipedia, read works of authors including Helena Blavatsky. And it also says they read science fiction, including works by Robert Heinlein and Arthur C. Clarke. I imagine that also includes L. Ron Hubbard, given those two names.
Obviously.
So, and I'll get more into what Heaven's Gate's about in 20 years from now. Okay.
Look, he's got white hair also. The Heaven's Gate guy, Applewhite.
I think that's just a reflection. I think he's entirely bald.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
They wore stylish Nikes when they took their lives.
They did. So in 1977, there was a disruption in this English broadcast, and I have a picture of the broadcast on the screen, and this voice took over called Vrilin, and he said he was of Ashtar Galactic Command, and he was talking about how mankind needs to stop developing nuclear weapons, and he was specifically talking about entering into the age of Aquarius, which from the article I read said that was quite an outdated term at that point, quite an old term. And you can see Vrilin, this figure describes itself as Vrilin, looks nearly identical to the dude who starts Raalism. Look, Virilin.
Oh,
Vrilin.
wow.
Pretty interesting. But Vrilin claims to be an extraterrestrial.
Maybe
but he's espousing these sort of theosophical ideas. What's up?
Maybe it was a rogue Rael.
Perhaps.
A planned situation.
So 3 years later, L. Ron Hubbard writes OT8. So this is like a degree or like a level in Scientology. I found this guy. Apparently they give you a plaque when you get OT8, and there's this cute little Photoshop. Says I spent over $400,000 to reach OT8, and all I got was this crappy certificate. But OT8 is a very strange document. L. Ron Hubbard talks about how he aligns himself with like the serpent in the Garden of Eden, and how like he's on the side of Lucifer, and he talks about how Jesus was a pedophile, and he's talking about like how he's on the side of the Galactic Federation. They're all aligned with Lucifer, and then there's this other galactic empire who's aligned with the God of the Bible, and they're at war with each other, and how he's trying to usher in the end times as described in the Book of Revelation. It's sort of like a satanic take on the Book of Revelation, but from like a UFO religion perspective. It's a pretty bizarre document. And it's the original OT8. That's leaked a couple of times. And he also, I believe, he identifies himself as the Beast, which Crowley would do. He says he's the Beast. And I believe he also says he's the forerunner to the Maitreya, which is like a theosophical idea of like the coming world teacher, right? Okay. In 1982, E.T. comes out. It turns aliens from something to be feared and concerned about to something that's cute and cuddly and lives in your closet. Also by Spielberg. And it definitely changed the public's idea of what aliens were, I would say. It was a very popular movie. Big pop culture touchstone of the generation, I would say.
For sure.
Do you remember when that came out?
Oh man, I saw it in the movie theater when I was a kid. I was probably 7, so it was 85 maybe, I think. 82?
Yeah.
82. Huh. Yeah. I remember when it came out, it was pretty crazy. I was eating Reese's Pieces because they were pushing them really hard.
Yeah.
With the movie. I don't know. He's pretty creepy. E.T. is kind of a creepy looking alien. Now I recently went back and watched that movie, and it's kind of bizarre. It's kind of seems like there's more levels of stuff going on. Like, sort of weird rituals almost, like the closet that E.T. is introduced. He's in there when he meets Drew Barrymore, the sister, and there's like this stained glass window, shaped like a flattened out cube almost, an octagon, or not an octagon,
hexagon.
Hexagon, yeah. It just seems kind of strange.
Yeah.
Especially after a lot of the things that have come out about Steven Spielberg.
Very much.
Sort of pedophilic almost. Anyway.
So we'll move
story.
on from that to this book, Communion, 1982. This is a very strange book. It's like memoirs, I guess, of this guy who says he's repeatedly abducted by aliens, and he details on how they hypnotically seduce him and try to have him sire like a human-alien hybrid. I believe this is where the idea comes from for that of aliens wanting to make hybrids with humans and having sexual relations with people. And it says it's a New York Times bestseller. And
Whitley Strieber's famously, I don't know if he's the first person that said that he was anally probed, but he was probably one of the most famous people to be anally probed in an encounter sort of deal. And I don't know, it's kind of a strange story. He's got a lot of things have happened to him. I guess maybe that's par for the course, that some people are more in tune to bizarre events and either notice it more or they're sort of a magnet to more. But Whitley Strieber's had a lot of really strange, highly strange things happen to him, and writing a book about being anally probed, it kind of makes the UFO community look crazy, I think. And then there's the gray on the cover. I mean,
that picture used to freak me out as a kid. I couldn't look at it.
For sure. Definitely scary. There's something there. It does look a lot like Alistair's lamb. Yeah.
The head shape, definitely.
And those black eyes. But anyway.
In 1984 is when the Majestic 12 documents came out. So this details like supposedly in 1954, gray aliens made contact with the U.S. government, and Eisenhower got involved, and like a treaty was signed. And then there's like a panel of 12 generals that are in charge of all alien activities. It purported something like that. At the time, the UFO community didn't really believe it. There was a recent analysis some guy did. He said he believed that they were legitimate documents that were false. So like the the military intentionally made these fake documents and distributed them to UFO researchers. Excuse me. And Bill Cooper says the same thing in Behold the Pale Horse, which I'll get to in a bit.
So they're kind of playing a long game with them,
mm-hmm.
with those documents.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's kind of weird, sort of. The fact that there's 12 of these majestic level guys, it sort of makes them kind of sound like UFO apostles.
Right, and this document is very specific, has very specific names and locations. So like you'd have to essentially be military personnel to know all this stuff, which is not correct. It's not real information as far as anyone can tell.
Yeah, well, they've been the UFO story has been propaganda for a long time, as you showed earlier.
In 1989, Bob Lazar came out and said he was working on alien craft in some kind of mountainside or underground facility. It was very compartmentalized, and he could only talk to one person in the entire operation. And he said that he believed the craft were found and not like taken over, like that they were like acquired in some kind of archaeological expedition.
Yeah, he has some pretty interesting stories about technologies.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess there was no real evidence that he was who he said he was. Apparently his college records got scrubbed, and
I think recently some document came out that proved some part of his story.
Oh.
And that was part of like the documentary that was recently made by him. Not by him, about him.
Yeah.
Because he recently had that like resurgence.
I haven't watched that, but yeah.
I'll get into that documentary series in a second.
Cool.
So in the early 1990s, Julian Assange, he has a group of hackers called the Chaos Computer Club. They also call themselves cypherpunks. They hack into the NSA, the Department of Defense, Los Alamos National Laboratory, which I believe did the Manhattan Project. And their goal was to obtain things like suppressed technologies and UFO files. So this is kind of where Julian Assange makes his international debut after coming out of the Great White Brotherhood cult, looking for UFO documents in the U.S. government. In 1991, Bill Cooper publishes Behold the Pale Horse. It has all kinds of conspiracy staples in it. He says that he saw a UFO when he was in the Navy on a submarine through the periscope. 2 other people saw it. He was debriefed, told not to tell anybody. After that incident, some people came to him and promoted him to a job in naval intelligence. He said that they gave him a form that said, asked him if he belonged to any of these organizations, and it was a list of like secret fraternities, like Freemasons and stuff. And he was in De Malay as a kid, so he checked De Malay, and he's like, I think that's why they let me into naval intelligence. And when he was at naval intelligence, his job was to prepare briefings and debriefings for personnel. So he would like make the folders of classified information to give to people and like type up documents. And he actually said he encountered in his work the Majestic 12 documents as a contingency to get UFO researchers off the trail of whatever the military had as far as like the intelligence apparatus's approach to UFOs. So he had said that the military actually provided those documents, and apparently the recent research has indicated that's the case.
That's very interesting.
Around the same time, David Icke actually reads Behold the Pale Horse and is inspired to begin writing books. I believe by this time he used to be a sports reporter. He I believe he said he was Jesus Christ on like live TV, and so he got fired.
Yeah, I think that was during this interview that you have the picture
of. Okay. Oh, the jumpsuit interview.
Yeah.
Kind of gets jumbled up. He publishes quite a bit of books. He's not the one who comes up with the idea of reptilian aliens. He just popularizes it. Like, it had been around in like V, I think it was like 1978, that TV series with reptilian aliens that pose as humans. He kind of puts a lot of stuff together in his own little worldview that becomes. The Wikipedia said his earlier works were more theosophical.
Yeah, for sure.
From what I can tell, that's the case. They become more and more overtly Gnostic, I would say, as time goes on.
Well, you can see how he's wearing those the pink and there's that purple color behind him. He a lot of times wears that purple color because it's the color is related to knowledge and intelligence. I guess it's sort of a theosophical idea.
Yeah. It's because each 7 ray is given a color too. Yeah.
I don't remember which one it was, but there's a purpose behind the colors that he chooses and that he wears, and the colors he stands in front of, I guess, in his own presentations.
So in 1994, Ashtar Command's still around. It's still around today. They have like buildings and stuff you can go to, and I think it's I can't think of the town. They have like an Ashtar Command place you can go into, and they have like posters of Ashtar around. They can hand you a pamphlet about them. Anyway, some members of Ashtar Command get a communication from Ashtar Galactic Command. The Galactic Fifth Fleet, they say, are going to come into the solar system, and they're going to take people who have talked to the Ashtar, the channelers. They're going to take them aboard ships of light and have them undergo something called physical vibrational transfer, which will involve moving their human consciousness to a higher dimension and transferred to the light ships. Did you follow what I said? Like, their soul's going to go into these spaceships. They get a communication from Ashtar Galactic Command that some UFOs are going to come and move their souls essentially up to these flying saucers.
Well,
and this definitely...
That sounds just like the Hale-Bopp guys,
Exactly. This is 3 years before that. So there was a precedent for this. Even with the Seekers and the Brotherhood of the Seven Rays, they kind of had the idea of UFOs coming to rapture people. But this was just 3 years before Heaven's Gate. And it's possible they just got the idea from hearing this.
That's very strange. Another unrelated Heaven's Gate fact is that a lot of the male members would castrate themselves.
Right, and that's like the parfait ritual of the European or the medieval Gnostics, like the Albigensians and the Cathars and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they castrate themselves right before death. Sergei Monast, I can't remember what country he's from. He reveals Project Bluebeam in 1994. So some people are skeptical about if it's a legitimate document, but Project Bluebeam is essentially a plan of the government to like project holograms in the sky and simulate an alien invasion so as to transfer power, whether that be to like a military dictatorship or to like the UN or something, and basically fundamental alter human government through this fake aerial show, basically laser light show. When it was published, apparently commenters realized how often this trope had been used in movies already. Apparently 2 Star Trek movies used the idea of projecting a fake thing in the sky to like alter the culture of the people below.
Wow.
And later, I think there's a Washington Post article that came out like 2004 or something, talking about how generals in the military were planning on projecting a projection of Allah in the sky during the Iraqi invasion. And he would have them say something so the Iraqis would lay down their arms. This is something floated in a joint chief of staff's meeting or something. You can look that up. So apparently the capability exists to do such a thing.
Yeah. Have you seen the videos of the city that was floating in the clouds in China? Years ago, people apparently could look up and they saw like a city in the clouds, and there were cars driving, and they could hear the sounds of the cars and the traffic. It sounds like blue beam technology. They were just testing it somewhere that they could monitor the internet and see what people thought. It's kind of weird. Like, would they be telling us about it in Star Trek and in the media? If they were actually going to do it, do you think they would be telling us about it? Do you think that it's like a predictive programming?
Well, possibly. It's possible it could be another like Majestic 12 circumstance where it's a legitimate document put out to like sow confusion, and maybe should actual angels or demons or aliens or whatever you call it come down, then the military. This is Dr. Steve. Is it Stephen Greer?
Yeah.
That guy. That's his thing. He's like, the military wants to trick you into thinking that aliens are bad, but they're actually good. I don't know. I don't. A lot of stuff I don't really make heads or tails of it. I just take it in as information and think about it.
It's really hard to make heads or tails of something that is just all over the place. I mean, there's so many disparate strings in the UFO sort of story that don't add up, that do add up, and it's on all sides of good and bad, and you really just have to kind of take a step back. I mean, especially if it's all just, if you don't think about it as being anything spiritual or, supernatural, if you just think about it as a mechanical, if they're aliens from another planet, from across the solar system, then it doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Right.
I mean, there's crazy stories like a farmer that says, aliens came and he got on their spaceship and they made him waffles, and somebody else is telling a story about, getting something gets dropped on their head and then they have a numb spot on their arm for the rest of their life,
Right.
Like, it really doesn't make a lot of sense together.
No. Another thing that's kind of weird coming up is Hillary Clinton meets with Lawrence Rockefeller on like a weekend retreat, 1995. So this is when she was first lady. I looked it up. Apparently they call Lawrence Rockefeller the Mystic Rockefeller.
Oh, the mystic.
Some out there stuff. You can see Hillary Clinton is photographed with this book called Are We Alone? And the book isn't actually asking if aliens exist. It's concerned with how human societies would most likely deal with aliens existing, like different cultures, different governments, what would likely happen to human culture should alien contact be established. And that's what they were most likely discussing at this weekend retreat, sort of like how would human culture react to aliens.
It looks like she's cradling that book like a baby, like sort of showing off the cover for whoever's going to be photographing her on purpose.
And you can see the book has an eye motif, which looks nearly identical to the Freemasonic Eye of Providence, right? But like a little dude looking through a hole.
The eye like the Watcher's eye.
Yeah.
I can look now, but maybe it can't touch as much as it used to be able to. Or maybe it can. It's hard to say.
The same year, Phil Schneider starts doing speaking tours. This guy claimed to, let me see what year. He says I think it's like he said in 1973. Trying to find it in my notes. There we go, 1979. He used to work in a deep underground military base. He said he was a contractor that would work with the big drills that just drill holes miles long. And on the job, they were drilling and they broke into an underground alien base. And there were like armed guards with them. So the firefight took off. He said he got blasted in the hand by a plasma gun, and that's why he's missing his fingers, as you can see.
Oh, yeah.
And that was his story. And he went around telling his story. Eventually, he would die of suicide. If you have seen what his dead body looks like, I don't know how you can kill yourself and wind up like that. I don't have it in the slideshow because I didn't know if we could show dead bodies, but he's pretty roughed up looking.
What was his how did he do it? Was it
Do you want me to put the picture on?
Well, maybe you could. I don't know.
It's not like gory.
It's just kind of curious after.
Let me pull up an image of him.
And it's weird that it's it's out there available.
Yeah.
Maybe it's fake. Maybe or maybe it's a message.
Yeah.
Maybe they just ended his character. Oh, wow.
Yeah. I don't know what happened to him, but he died. But there are deep underground military bases. There's one under my feet, actually. It's a decommissioned military base. There's an entrance like half a mile up from my house. Apparently, drug runners were using it. I imagine human traffickers too. And apparently, the city just decided to concrete over all the entrances. And so there used to be a military base a few miles north of town, and they gave it to the local university to build an observatory out there.
Wow. So I guess now the CIA has a new entrance and exit to the underground.
Yeah, that's what I think. But yeah, so I don't know if there's aliens right underneath me, but in Phil Schneider's case, he said that the deeper the underground base, the more in control the aliens are.
Oh yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah.
The experiments get creepier and creepier also. The further down, the more human-animal hybrids there are. The higher the classified rating is.
Right. 1997 is when Heaven's Gate mass suicide happens. I got pictures of their sneakers right here. I don't know about the dress code on the UFO they're going to, but I personally wouldn't want to go if I had to wear those shoes.
Yeah.
But their idea was that the Hale-Bopp comet was coming by. There was going to be a UFO right behind. So right as the UFO is going to crest over the Earth, they kill themselves, and their soul goes on to the UFO, and I guess they go to heaven. Or it takes them to heaven. That's like the rapture, is them killing themselves and like hitching a ride on the UFO. I believe 2 or 3 members survived this incident. Not like 39 of them died. Everyone who killed themselves. There's some people who were told not to kill themselves. I believe one of them still runs the Heaven's Gate website, and you can like email them and talk to them about it.
I think he might have also opted out of castration too. I think there was one guy that opted out, and he kind of, if my memory serves me, he's the guy that chickened out when they
might be the same guy
when they docked with the UFO. Yeah. But he might have. Maybe I haven't studied this stuff for years. Heaven's Gate was also real when it happened. It was just bizarre. Especially
1997 was the Phoenix Lights. I remember seeing this on TV. And I was so young, I was just like, oh, there's just UFOs on the TV. There was this line of light seen flying in the sky. over Phoenix. There's been many explanations. There's not one single explanation. Some people say, oh, it was flight school students flying in a straight line with their lights off. But
yeah, I've also heard them say that they were flares, that they were doing a drill, and they shot off flares in one place so that everyone would look over there towards the flares when something else happened over here. You know, the whole like distraction thing, like look over here, look at these flares, when the real aliens were landing somewhere else.
there's apparently so it was in Nevada, and apparently one explanation is the Maryland National Guard, the Air Force, was in Arizona doing a secret mission. I don't know. I can't make sense of what they were saying, but most of the explanations are almost as bizarre as the incident.
Yeah, and then I think afterwards, I mean, like tons of people saw the incident, and then
Right.
afterwards, the mayor of Phoenix came on the news, and he was like standing next to somebody dressed up as an alien, in like an alien suit, and he was like, everybody saw those lights. It was aliens, and they're here, and I'm talking to them right now. Ha 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 ha. You know, kind of made a joke about it.
It's almost like the signs they have at the Denver airport. I don't know if
Yeah.
you've been recently, but they're like, we got underground lizards.
Oh yeah,
You're
definitely.
like, great.
So they can make a mockery of it and hide that there actually is something going on there, and make it into an extreme parallel.
Yeah. So in 1998, the next year, the CIA remote viewer named Ingo Swann comes out this book called Penetration. It's about remote viewing the moon back in the 70s. And for the CIA. And he talks about how he remote viewed the moon and saw all these transient structures built around, and all these lights and like sort of Buckminster Fuller domes. And he saw these like ass naked aliens walking around, and they could like detect his psychic presence there. He had to get out of there. So, and I recently actually just read this book. It was pretty short. It's pretty weird. It talks about how like aliens come to Earth in like human bodies, like do stuff, and like there's some government agency that surveils them. I don't know.
What? So say that again. There's a
Like aliens come to Earth in human bodies, and like there's a special government agency that like surveils them,
like
monitors their activity.
like Will Smith in Men in Black.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't have Men in Black on this slideshow.
Well, that makes sense. It's Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In 2002, this guy named Gary McKinnon, he hacks into 97 military and NASA computers. And he finds evidence of a program called Solar Warden, which I believe used language like off-world personnel, which seemed to imply that there were people on a spaceship. It purports to be a secret military space program that is under the auspices of the UN. This is what he says. Gary McKinnon was attempted to be extradited from the UK to be tried for hacking into computers, and I believe the UK blocked all the extradition requests every time they have been made, which is pretty interesting, to say the least. And apparently someone, I have a link here, I haven't read the article too well, but apparently someone actually did a Freedom of Information request to some agency, and they actually confirmed the existence of Solar Warden, that like a program called Solar Warden exists. And it's pretty interesting. Solar Warden, to me, reminds me of Abraxas, who's the 365th Aeon, right?
Yeah.
Like a solar guardian. That's what comes to my mind when I hear that phrase.
Wow.
In 2007, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program starts. Okay, so the guy on the left is a guy named Robert Bigelow. He's a real estate developer in Las Vegas. He actually started a research program called the National Institute for Discovery Science in 1995, and they actually bought Skinwalker Ranch to research it. So the recent Skinwalker Ranch documentary concerns footage that was filmed whenever he owned it with this civilian research institute. Okay, and they got sold to somebody else. The same guy who made that documentary just made the Bob Lazar documentary.
Huh.
So this guy, Bigelow, who used to own Skinwalker Ranch and had this National Institute for Discovery Science to research UFOs, asked Harry Reid, the senator of Nevada, to start this program, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program in 2007. It's essentially a government continuation of Robert Bigelow's research.
Wow.
Okay. And they had $22 million over 5 years. In 2012, it got shut down. They're apparently supposed to be studying UAPs, which are unidentified aerial phenomenon, otherwise called UFOs. 2014, Pope Francis says he would baptize an alien.
Yeah.
I don't know what more to say about that.
Well, that's just bringing it to the forefront of our subconscious brains, you know.
Right. And then putting it in like a religious context in a very weird way.
Yeah, very weird.
Like, why would you? I don't know. Like theologically, it barely makes sense. Whatever. We're moving on.
It puts a lot of stories from the Bible in, you know, kind of whack. Like, you know, if like it makes you think: is there an alien Jesus? Is there a Jesus on other planets that saves them?
Right.
You know, or is it just ours? You know, it kind of throws a wrench in Catholic theology, I think.
Very much so. So in 2015, Tom DeLonge founds To the Stars Academy. I just learned, so this program right here, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification. On the Wikipedia page, it says people from this program went to the Stars Academy.
Huh.
Tom belongs to the Stars Academy. And so these you can look on the website. They have like former CIA, former DID, former DIA, like real dudes working on Tom DeLonge's alien disclosure project. I have some miscellaneous pictures of Tom DeLonge here. He was a former member of Blink-182. I remember back in the day, I think he had another band called Boxcar Racers, and they had a song called Aliens Exist. I remember him singing about aliens back in the day. And he's back on it now. Very strange character. He was seen talking to John Podesta in the 2016 Podesta email leaks that WikiLeaks put out, once again with an association with Julian Assange. And basically, Podesta was in a documentary movie, full-length movie that Tom DeLonge made, and he was being interviewed. And Podesta has been a long advocate for like disclosure, government disclosure, and he was going around sort of like insinuating in the 2016 election that Hillary Clinton would disclose all government files, and then later Hillary Clinton would specifically say she would disclose all government files. So you had like people in the UFO community campaigning for Hillary at their talks and at their conferences because she's going to disclose all UFO files. And then in late 2017, To the Stars Academy starts pushing out news articles to the mainstream media, and they're picking up on it. Now, at first, it wasn't clear that it was To the Stars Academy that was putting out this information. It seemed like it was the Navy or some sort of military agency, but it's actually To the Stars Academy taking this military information and publishing it. And I believe they published 3 stories, and that they got taken up each time. So that was like recently, like the Tic Tac UFO was the most recent story.
Yeah.
There was like a naval encounter that was the first one that went around, and then after all that stuff came out, the Navy changed their protocols so as to start openly taking in UFO information that their personnel see in the line of duty.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah, I think I saw that documentary about the Tic Tac UFO, and it seemed well produced. You know?
Oh yeah, they're a media company. Like he wants to make animated movies and stuff to like. He's straight up like a soft disclosure guy. He's like, we're not going to reveal everything, but just enough that the public can know. And he has questionable allegiances from my miscellaneous pictures I chose.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know what's going through his head. He's associated with all kinds of high level players, and he's just some guy.
Yeah.
But he's a pop culture icon. So he's the face of this a very serious enterprise of all these people. But and in a way, it's like the guy who owned Skinwalker Ranch ultimately led to the Stars Academy thing. Very weird.
What better way to get that generation of folks, of American propaganda consumers in on the UFO idea, but to have their favorite band, you know, their
Blink-182 is kind of where like Gen X and millennials cross over, you know?
Yeah.
It's like they both have that as a touchstone, and it's like anti-establishment, I guess. It's pop punk. It's like mass appeal, anti-establishment, and yeah, and it's someone the kids can relate to. Like, oh man, this guy's cool. I can trust him.
It's kind of weird.
He's got some weird stuff coming out. Like I know he had an interview on Joe Rogan. And at the end, he was talking with a someone from the military, and he's like, "Do you believe in the Greek gods?" The what we're talking about is something similar, which in my mind seems like he's talking about planetary archons.
Yeah, was that Tom DeLonge that said that?
Yes, that's what he hinted at the very end of his Joe Rogan interview.
Oh wow.
Oh yeah, it's very very weird. And his book, I can't remember. I don't think it's Secret Machines. He has another book that was published through To the Stars Academy. It like the first half of it is just a rehashed ancient astronauts like theory.
Yeah, well that's the most current idea of everything. You know, the human origin story had to have been ancient aliens because how else? You know. In a materialistic idea, we would have to be created by something, because it's just we're just too complex to have popped up on our own. So it was ancient aliens that made us. It's yeah. The History Channel's been pumping it for probably 10 years now with the whole ancient alien show.
Oh yeah, that's and there's so many like memes. It's so familiar to people. Yeah. That show. And at the end of the day, we don't really know what is real of any of this. You know, it's all there's like a establishment narrative saying this is real, this isn't real. But the things that aren't real versus are real are still go on to inform the next step in the chain, you know?
Oh, yeah.
These things are influencing each other. Whether it's a real history or not, it's something that's building to something, right? And it's something we're all familiar with to some degree. I'm sure most listeners are familiar with at least half of the material in this presentation. I just have it lined up in a way so that we can see it move sort of from synchronistic occultism to a modern day materialistic worldview.
Well, it feels to me like it's going to culminate in some sort of big event or big disclosure is going to be like aliens are here and you got to like declare martial law and I mean, Werner von Braun being a prominent Nazi and coming over and then being part of, the NASA, and then Walt Disney being best friends with him pretty much, and just the trajectory of the UFOs and aliens and space story kind of feels like it's got an important place. And are we gonna end up on Mars? You know, with Elon Musk, with elongated muskrat, or is it some kind of a story? You know?
Yeah. In like these abduction reports, it's often the aliens are like, you have to change your culture, right? And there's many people, at least in the last century, who say to the common people, they say, you have to change your culture, whether this be violently or more subtle and coerced. This is what we see top down. People are constantly asked to change their personal politics and their culture so as to not be cast out of society. You know, and I wouldn't say it's all pointing in one direction, but ultimately, if you have a big hoodwink over all of human culture, you can change it to whatever you want it to be to benefit you.
That's right.
And one of Jules Verne's stories, The Time Machine, there's the Morlocks and the Eloi, right? You have two different types of human that evolve separately, right? The Eloi used to be the upper crust of society, and the Morlocks were like the labor workers. But at some point, the roles shifted, and the Eloi are like farmed underground, and the Morlocks eat them.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like you can stratify the profane and the initiated forever, for all time. If you can change world culture irreversibly, you can be secure as an initiated person that you can control. Because in a simple sense, magic, or the practice of esotericism, is about manipulating subtle things, and it's about illusions and manipulating expectations.
Yeah.
And changing people's ideas and making actualize your words. And that's what propaganda is all those things. And we see that with cybernetics associations, with globalist organizations. There's all kinds of propaganda coming from every which direction. And one classic and almost cherished piece of propaganda is alien war, you know? Yeah. It's like a fun story you can always dip back into when you're bored, you know? You can look something up, and it's been around for so long. I don't think people have looked at it in a global perspective and see where it has come from and see where it might go, you know?
Oh, yeah. It's hard to remember past, you know, when you were old enough to watch a movie and remember what it was about. So,
sorry about that. Just realized my computer was about to die.
Oh,
all right.
Good call.
I'm back. Yeah, it's hard to piece all this stuff together, and so much of this reflecting between you and me was thinking about all this stuff from our childhood and how this stuff like was formative and how it informed the way we think about stuff. And in some ways, it makes you think, oh, this is what's hidden. What's the government hiding from us? But it kind of keeps you from looking at other things, you know. And in some ways, it regularizes people to governments not telling you important things about the world.
Yeah.
And coming to expect that and kind of being complacent with it.
Yeah, for sure.
I just realized at the very end of this, I left off. What is it? March on Area 51. What's it called?
Oh, yeah.
The hashtag?
I'm not sure. It's about storming Area 51.
Yeah. I forgot to mention that I believe it was Bob Lazar who first came out with Area 51, which is the facility at Groom Lake, which is a real place.
I think you're right.
So, and it went from, they have UFOs, so they have alien bodies there. And the weird thing about that recent hashtag is all the celebrities that were in on it and were posting at the time.
Yeah,
And
Chuck
there's something
Norris
big going on. I think it was the Epstein, arrest.
Yeah.
Which may have itself been elaborate smoke and mirrors, but that was happening at the same time, and it seemed like an enormous distraction, especially with the amount of media attention, celebrity Instagram posts, and just kind of how stupid it is.
Like they were showing they were briefing the army MPs on what Naruto running is, and because there's all these memes about people that are gonna Naruto run into the Area 51. It's like a cartoon from anime.
There's a picture of in the army, a slideshow. This guy's like saying, as a slideshow that says what Naruto running is, and he's like telling recruits not to Naruto run. So it's possible some of the military personnel already were familiar with Naruto running. They may encounter it in the recruits, but like there's the military being like, oh, we stand by to guard Area 51. Essentially being like, we'll kill anybody who comes in, but I'm sure that they have huge microwave platforms. They can just like heat you up and feel like you're burning from the inside out.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
Like they don't have to kill anybody to stop every single one of them from getting in.
Well, they just need to bring a big truck full of Hot Pockets, and everybody will sit down and have lunch instead of storming.
Well, the thing is, they're all supposed to converge on that town of like 45 people. So if you give them all Hot Pockets, they're going to be stuck there with no toilets.
Oh, that would be bad.
Just throw a wrench in the whole thing.
Hot Pockets and porta potties.
No porta potty. They'll make them leave. You can't Naruto run with the soiled trousers.
No, you can't. You gotta Naruto shuffle.
Okay.
Do you remember the Balloon Boy fiasco? It was
I don't think so.
It was back in 2009. It was on October 15th, 2009, and this guy made a helium balloon, like a big sort of almost blimp-sized balloon that looked like a flying saucer, and he let it up, and then he thought his son was inside of it, and there was like a big news.
I do remember that.
Like, it was like a day-long thing where they're like following this UFO balloon with cameras, and they're like, there's a little boy in it. Like, I forget how old he was. He was like 8 or 9 years old. His name was Falcon, and they thought that he was in the balloon, and then eventually they found the boy hiding in a trunk in his yard, and apparently his dad told him to hide in this trunk, so it was all like a hoax on purpose, like sort of a publicity sort of stunt. But the story is kind of weird. I mean, they followed this balloon, this UFO-shaped balloon that was supposedly holding a boy named Horace.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Falcon was his name, but, Horace the Falcon is what I think of. So I'm not sure what happens on October 15th, if there's anything special about the day, but
I'm not either.
Just another bizarre alien sort of idea, I don't know.
Just kind of get eyes on it.
Yeah.
So, let's see. I was just looking at the chat. Someone was asking if we're doing Collins. Do we have the infrastructure for that tonight?
Maybe. Let me see if I don't know if we can do it with a phone. I think we might be able to do it with Discord.
Okay.
groups.
We can see if anyone in the comments wants to do a Discord call. If that's okay with you.
Yeah. Let me pop the Discord up. Let's see. Should I make I'll go down to bottom here. So there's a voice section here in Discord, right?
Yeah, you would just it's like in the private message, or you can do the call-ins section. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, isn't there like a group call in live?
Yes.
Yeah, call in live.
Yeah.
Looks like.
I'll join that real quick.
Yeah, if you guys have any questions, are you in there? I see you popped in.
I am in. If anyone would like
Let me.
to make a call.
I might have to mute you over here.
Yeah, I went ahead and did that. So.
Should you mute your? Are you still there?
Hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Let me see. Okay, I'm not sure if that's gonna work. Will you talk again?
Yeah. I'm hearing double as well.
Okay. Yeah, that's not fun. Let's see if I can turn the volume down on it. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. I can. I'm still hearing double.
Oh, you gotta...
Give me one moment.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's gonna work for sure, you guys, but it's worth a shot sometimes. How about now? Do you hear double?
Went ahead and disconnected.
Oh, from the...
I think our voice is muted on the broadcast.
Okay. I'm not sure if it's gonna work that way. Anybody have any questions or comments to put in the chat here? I have another UFO story. I didn't tell it earlier because it's kind of a big one, and it's I wasn't really ready to tell it yet. So this one kind of blew my mind, and it really got me. It got me on the track of researching UFOs and all kinds of bizarre stuff, and I ended up. I mean, it's probably why I'm here today, because something happened and it really confused me. You know, sort of startled me. It was back in, I think it was like 2009. I had a friend that gave me this book, and it was about meditation. It was called Zen for the Beginner's Mind, and I was kind of going through a hard time in my life, and so I read this book, and I read it in like a couple days. It was super quick reading. It was pretty much just how to meditate, you know, how to breathe and how to focus your mind and empty it and clear it and think about stuff, or, you know, think about whatever you were trying to think about. And so it was pretty cool. It was fresh in my mind. I was meditating a little bit, and I got an opportunity to drive a car, to deliver a car from Portland to Walla Walla for somebody. Oh, come here. Sorry, my dog's barking. So, and it was a convertible. It was a Mustang GT, 1988 Mustang GT convertible. It's a pretty sweet car. And I was driving it like from Portland to Walla Walla, and it was kind of late when I left. So I was like driving at night. I put the top down, and I was looking at the stars. And like, I guess a little background was, before this happened, I had just kind of stumbled upon this public access show about like unsolved mysteries and UFOs and stuff, and elongated skulls and all kinds of crazy stuff. And I've been watching it for a few weeks and remembering like how much I loved, you know, weird stuff, you know, sort of mysterious stuff. Like I hadn't thought about it in a long time. And so I was kind of obsessed with the show. Like I used to tune in like every time it was on, I would go and watch it for a few weeks. And so anyway, I was in the car. I was driving the car. It was like 10 o'clock at night. And it's kind of a long drive. It's like a 3.5 hour drive, sometimes 4 hours. And it didn't have a CD player. The car, you know, had the original like tape deck. And I didn't have any tapes. So I was just tuning through the radio, like listening for trying to find something good to listen to. And there's some spots where you're in the Columbia Gorge and you don't get any radio. So I was going through AM and FM, and I landed upon this one talk radio station. And so I was like kind of listening to it for a minute, and it was Coast to Coast with George Norrie, and I had never heard it before. I was like, wow, this is kind of interesting, you know, like there's a lot of commercials, but you know, it was kind of cool. And he was interviewing this lady, and she was talking about how she photographed UFOs. Like she photographed UFOs all the time. And she was talking about how she would meditate, and she would like sit on her front porch with a camera on her lap, and she would meditate and think about UFOs and think about how she'd want to see one. And then she would open up her eyes, and there'd be like UFOs there. And so she'd photograph them. And she had a whole bunch of pictures of them. And I was like, wow, this is cool. And it's so relevant because I had just read this book. Like a few days earlier, I had finished this book about meditation. Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind is what it was called. And so I was like listening to this radio show and driving, and I had the top down in the car, and I was just looking up. It was a beautiful, clear night, and I was looking at all these stars. It was gorgeous. Thinking about UFOs, you know, not really seeing anything because I'm still driving, so I couldn't really pay that much attention. So when I finally got up to Walla Walla, I took the car to where I was staying, and I you know, the people there were already in bed because it was like midnight or something, and I was still kind of like, I was a little bit hopped up on caffeine because I was drinking sodas while I was driving. And so I sat down in the backyard, and I had this beautiful view of the southern sky. And so I crossed my legs, and I decided I was going to meditate and think about seeing if I could call up a UFO, because it sounded pretty freaking interesting. So I sat out there, and I had a radio with me, so I was listening to the rerun of Coast to Coast. Like they played like the whole show, and then it started over and they played it again. And I sat out there and just like looking up at the sky and closing my eyes, and I was imagining, I was like building this Eiffel Tower shaped tower in the mental world above my head. It was like in like the thought realm. So I built this tower in my head, and I imagined that it was calling out to UFOs, like it was going, you know, like a
Morse code.
Morse code, yeah. But it was in my mind. It was like saying, UFO. I want to see a UFO. Come and show me. You know, I want to see you. And then I would look, you know, after I'd meditate for a few minutes, and then I'd meditate for longer, and I would look, and I didn't see anything. It was a beautiful night. I didn't see anything though. And then I started getting tired, so I decided I'd go to bed. I went to bed, and I was just about to fall asleep, like. And I got a phone call, like my cell phone rings, and it was this ex-girlfriend that I had. I mean, we'd broken up like 2 or 3 months previous, but she worked at a bar, and so sometimes she would just call and like harass me, like, you know, after she got off work, she just like, you know, I don't know, was trying to talk to me, and so I get this phone call. And it was probably about 3 a.m. when this happened, maybe like 3:15 or 3:20. And so I get this call, and I didn't want to wake up anybody in the house. So I grabbed the phone, I picked it up, and I was like, hello? And I ran outside and ran around to the front of the house. And I was like standing there listening on my phone. And I hear these cows. It was like multiple cows, and so it was sort of a rural area where I was at. And these cows were just boo, boo, you know, like boo, like frantic, like weird, like out of the ordinary moves. And I look up, and across the road, there's this field with some cows in it and a barn. And there's this like egg-shaped craft. It was like floating in the field right above the cows, and it was shaped like an egg, and it was like an orange color, like amber, like a really bright, like almost sodium vapor streetlight color. And it's like I could see like these cows underneath of it mooing like crazy, and like it was like shining down on the roof of this barn, and it was probably about 25 or 30 feet off the ground, maybe 35 feet. And I was like, whoa, and I had the phone in my hand. I was like, put it to my ear. Well, I was listening to this ex-girlfriend talk, and I was like, I can't talk now. I'm looking at a UFO. And so I just like dropped the phone. And as I said that, like, it like kind of just turns a little bit. So it's like pointed, you know, the small end of the egg is in the big end. They're parallel to the road, because the road was right in front of me. And it just like starts moving like so smooth. It's moving like along the road, like parallel to the road, but like over the fields, just about 10 feet over the fence in the field across the street. And it was about, I couldn't tell if it was between like minivan sized and like a small 1-car garage. It wasn't very big, but I watched it like cruise down the road, and it was staying the same height off the ground. And so it was like moving up and down and following the terrain, like up and down of the road as it moved down the road. And I ran out to the street, and I followed it down the road a little ways until I couldn't see it anymore. It just like kept the same speed, and it just went like up and down off to the Blue Mountains over here. And I was just like, what did I just see? What was that? You know, like, oh my gosh, I like my heart was racing. And I went to bed, and like the next morning I got up and I was like, what was that? You know, like I seemed to forget at first. Like I tried to not think about it. The fact that I was meditating on seeing a UFO. I was just like, wow, I saw a UFO. That was crazy. But like, I didn't really, really acknowledge to myself that I was like trying to like call one up until like later on down the road. Cause like every time I'd look at that information, I'd be like, there's no way, you know? Cause I thought the aliens were from some other planet, you know, across the galaxy, or like maybe they're from a parallel dimension, you know, like a dimension that's on top of us, but, you know, I thought that like, I was like, there's no way that I have some sort of special power that nobody else has. So me calling it up was just a coincidence. Like I didn't see that, you know, like it must have just been a coincidence. And it boggled my mind for a long time. I mean, I started looking into UFOs and everything, and nothing made sense. Nothing made sense at all. Until like I like recently when I kind of discovered Tracy and her work, just like the possibility that it could be like a spiritual entity, and that anybody could call up a UFO, but you just have to do it, I guess. I don't know. I wasn't like scared. I didn't think that it was an evil or a good thing. It was just weird. And it didn't really interact with me at all. It was just there.
Right.
I told people about it, and I felt like nobody believed me at all, you know? I felt crazy for a long time. Just weird.
That reminds me that, so the ancient Greek, Agoiades is a term that means like holy guardian angel.
Yeah.
But the term literally means dawn egg.
Wow. Yeah, it was.
It translated as like luminous body, but
that's what it was. It looked like an egg that was. I mean, I couldn't tell if it was all the glowing orange color, or if it was something like dark metal that had like sparks all around it, or like it was just that it was like an energy thing. And there was like no windows. There was no. As soon as I was aware that it was there, it left.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't disappear, but I mean, I didn't see what happened after it got out of sight. It went down the road, and I mean, I searched for a long time to find other things like that. I found a few lights that were that color in UFO sightings, amber-colored lights, and they were always doing kind of weird stuff, like maybe there was like several lights and they'd come together and be one, or some egg-shaped stuff, but never anything like that together. And I don't know, I really had to think that I think that we all have the capabilities to work on the thought level of reality. You know, like there's a realm on top of everything where our thoughts go, you know, and it's where it all is, and we can tap into it, or we can influence it, or we can use it to co-create. Like, I don't know if at some points I thought maybe it was just because I wanted to see it that the universe made it appear to me, you know, and it wasn't anything except for just a manifestation of my thoughts that I wanted to see. But I mean, it was, if I didn't hear the cows mooing like crazy, like I would think that I just hallucinated it. But right. I mean, I heard these cows mooing like crazy, and I saw them like moving, and I watched it light up the roof of this barn as it went over the top. So, I mean, unless I had a super specific hallucination, I mean, I never had a hallucination like that before. So anyway, that's my my story, and that kind of set me on a path to look into all this stuff. You know, like after that, like I had to keep an open mind and just kind of search. Mm. I forgot about it for a while, and just because you just can't, if you can't like resolve something like that, then it'll drive you crazy.
Right. And it's pretty common with a good deal of us that like we're kind of tuned into this stuff and we just completely forget it for years.
Yeah.
And then something like smacks us in the face and we have to like go back into it.
Yeah. Yeah, it was pretty weird. Anyway, that's kind of why I ended up moving up here, because part of that was at one point I had a period of time where I was looking for a job, and I was like, where am I going to go? Where am I going to go find a job? And because that happened in Walla Walla, I came up here and started looking, found work. So it was pretty weird. I mean, anyway, that's kind of a weird origin story of how I got into occult things, I guess.
And Krista in the chat's saying that the meditating to materialize UFOs is like what Dr. Greer does. He does the Hindu puja. He'll get like French diplomats out to a mountain, and they'll all sing Vedic hymns and meditate, and they'll materialize a UFO, and they'll take a picture of it, and
yeah,
be like, we just summoned the UFO guys.
I've never really been able to meditate like that since then, because it kind of freaks me out.
Yeah.
But I mean, there was a couple times where I was kind of looking for stuff, and I've seen similar things, but never like that. Like one time I was building a chicken coop outside, and I was like looking at the stars, thinking, oh, it'd be great if I saw a UFO, but not really paying that much attention. And I was aware of this star next to me, a really bright star. Like I thought it was just one of the stars. Mm-hmm. And I turned and looked at it, and it just goes, and like kind of flies off to the side. And I was like, whoa! It's like, oh well, because at that point, I mean, you tell people and they think that you're crazy. So there's no real point. I mean, I would tell everybody, but I don't want them to. Sometimes people that don't get it, they don't take you, they think you're a wacko after that. So you just got to find the right
setting.
Yeah, the right setting, the right circumstances to talk about it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm pretty happy to tell that story here. So thanks everybody for listening. Thanks, Harrison.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna have to sign off. I'm getting pretty sleepy over here.
Yeah, it's probably a good idea. You're a couple hours later than me, aren't you?
Yeah, it's getting a little late. So I'd like to, again, thank you for having me on. I had a big time. I enjoyed putting all this stuff out to be seen and having a chat with you.
Yeah, your information was kick-ass. You did a great job researching it and putting together all those slides. I think that, I mean, you could probably write a book about your outline for today's show. I mean, there's so much great information. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And would you like to lead us off?
What's that?
Would you like to lead us off?
Lead us off for the okay buys?
That's right.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, bye.
Okay, bye.
Thanks for coming, everybody. Okay, bye.
Thanks for stopping by.
Okay, bye.